Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Today I want to talk about the absolution of whiteness. There's a tendency in our studies of race and racism to forget, or better yet, ignore, that the whiteness that we're allegedly revolting against as black academics is not simply an obstacle to seeing the humanity of black folk, but is also the perpetrator of genocide, the colonial settler that used rape, murder, and disease to eradicate indigenous peoples. As with most black families in the South, I too have a oral history of an indigenous ancestor, one on my mother's side that was Cherokee and the other on my father's side that was Choctaw. And in both of these histories, it becomes extremely clear that the current explanations that even I use and I see other black academics using to explain white supremacy is currently lacking. Whiteness can't continue to be that academic category that we use to gain recognition from our oppressors. The death of indigenous nations represents a horror that black scholars continue to absolve whiteness of, and our belief that we could eventually change it and open it up enough for us to gain footing. Now, as you know, in my work, I'm constantly complaining about this, that whiteness is simply another mechanism of recognition. But what we do in that is we attack whiteness, we attack racism as if it can change, not recognizing that that recognition is built on the backs, the bodies, and the blood of our indigenous kinfolk that have suffered the brunt of something that they can't speak about, right? They're being silenced by that reality of genocide. So in the university, what I see time and time again is how white scholars have made a living feigning an interest in indigenous thought the same way they pretend to care about race and racism. Indigenous nations have been called pragmatists in philosophy. They've been called organic democracies, and now they're going around calling these same thoughts feminists. These accusations, these are not titles, these are accusations that the Academy is waging against indigenous folk are merely attempts to soil the actual thought of these nations who fought and died against white supremacy and settler oppression. And now today, even black folk, we continue to remain silent while we let white folk claim heritage and ancestry that they took by rape and destroyed by violence. When we look at the work of people like Vine Deloria, he didn't make his work or any of his multiple manuscripts, his books, his texts, based on the hope that the colonizer would eventually recognize it as academic and subject that indigenous traditional thought to the colonization and categorization of disciplines. In fact, he argued the exact opposite. He argued that the Indian worldview sustains itself as in the spiritual, philosophical activity of being native. And it was those traditional teachings, their being in their existence rather than the simple imitations of their oppressor, that spoke about indigenous people's existence to the world. And this is something that black folk can take heed of here, right? And the fact that we escaped genocide, that we went through slavery and survived, does not give us the ability, rather it shouldn't give us the privilege or the standpoint to believe that we can simply attack whiteness as something that we want to change and become a part of. We should not desire to become part of empire, because if we understood the history of empire, the horror of empire, the nightmare that we keep pretending is just a daydream that we can fly away, we'd understand that if we too were the victims of genocide, that can't be eradicated. That is not something that you could discuss in dialogue. But unfortunately, these types of illuminations are lost today, as any white person, especially white women scholars, simply claim ownership over indigenous heritage, with little to no knowledge of the various worldviews that complicate a claim to indigenous knowledge. So whereas indigenous feminists like Andrea Smith are very clear that there's a need to analyze patriarchy as a system of white oppression against Native folk that is absent of the worldview, the indigenous worldview itself, contemporary white feminists pretend that they can simply converge these ideas without consequence. Thereby they enforce this idea, and they poison the native indigenous thought process and their worldview with white conceptual pathogens. Right? See, the issue here, like is always the issue when we talk about whiteness, is an issue of commodification. On the one hand, it's how black academics who claim to be the arch nemesis of whiteness continue to allow these types of commodifications to happen. We externalize the issue of the settler-colonial relationship and say that because it's not the racist relationship, or we don't see it as the anti-black relationship, that it is inconsequential to how black people think about the world. But that's not the case. The reality of the situation is that our relationships with white people, those white people who are the existential bearers of whiteness, that continue to believe that they can be anything and everything their hearts desire just because they're white, right? Because they have the power to be any identity. They're the people who allow the academic industrial complex to continue to pimp out oppression, as if identity politics becomes the only basis or the primary basis by which one gains authority, where it becomes the ultimate oracle voice. The real issue here is how we hold white people and whiteness as a category responsible for the genocide that are committed against our indigenous nations, as well as in continuing to enforce today as a selectocracy against African-descended people.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy. Today's date, Monday, February 24th, 2014. So I have been told. Fundraising for the month of March, starting a few days early. Listener-supported counter-racist radio. Invest if you think the broadcast is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal is in the top right. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Our guest for today's broadcast, he was with us right about the middle of autumn 2013. Got a lot of great information. I think a lot of our listeners are big fans of his scholarship. He does a weekly segment on SiriusXM radio. Rob Redding, black male, great counter-racist effort as well. Lots of excellent commentary. You heard an example right at the very beginning of the program. Always think it is great when we get black folks who are willing to not pussyfoot and be explicit, accurate, honest on the system of racism, white supremacy. I feel like that's pretty rare, especially folks who are in the what they call in the academy. I feel like there is a lot of pressure to water down and dilute commentary to appease and not anger white folks. We are, unfortunately, still under the system of racism, white supremacy, meaning we are unfortunately dependent upon them for getting our paychecks and other needs met, and always great to see black folks who are courageous and willing to speak out truthfully in an effort to give better, more accurate understanding of the problem we face, white supremacy, racism. Our guest, again, joining us for the second time, he is an associate professor of philosophy at Texas A&M University. He also has a lot of great articles that are online. They're free. You can check them out. I'll give the address a few times as we roll during the broadcast. Real pleasure to have him back on the program to exchange views. Joining us live, great state of Texas, Dr. Tommy Curry. Dr. Curry, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
Outstanding. So great to hear from you. Always a pleasure to hear your views, thoughts on the problem, racism, white supremacy. For our listeners, this might be their first time hearing from you. Anything that you think listeners should know about who you are, the work that you do?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, my work, as I said last time, is pretty much in critical race theory and anti-colonial thought. So I take very seriously the idea that white supremacy should frame the way that we talk about racism and anti-blackness in the United States and throughout the diaspora. I think that sometimes we get caught up in the theory and we lose sight of the actual people, the working class black people that white supremacy affects. Because as you were just saying, in the academy, there is a tendency for black people to be rewarded for being silent or for watering down the evidence of our oppression. So I think that, to put that in context, it's extremely important that when we talk about white supremacy, we really implicate the impacts that white supremacy has in the daily lives of African-descended people.
Amen. Amen. I want to get right to it, see if we can cover as much as we can, and encourage listeners to dial in if you all have questions as well. I know quite a few of our listeners, they follow you, and when you do other programs or when you do your weekly installments, they check you out. So the folks, you all have questions for Dr. Curry, don't be bashful. Go ahead and dial in. Don't wait till the last minute. I want to start out and get your view. White ignorance. This is something that is ubiquitous when discussions of racism, white supremacy pop up really anywhere in the world. And I would just point to just the last 7 days. We had a non-white male, so-called Indian in South Africa who was talking about the same problem, going down there in Johannesburg, cutting scholarships to keep black students from enrolling, calling black students Kafirs, nigger, same thing that Mandela was complaining about during his time on the planet. The very next day, we had a black female in North Carolina who was wrongfully terminated where she saw a whole litany of black people who were not being promoted, not getting equal salary as white people. Even white people who were not as qualified were being promoted. The two common threads. Number one, both of these people's problem at the root of it, it was white people practicing racism. The second common thread, both of them explicitly stated that white people are ignorant about racism. What is your thought on that suggestion, this belief, this notion that somehow all of these terroristic acts that are committed against black people, that somehow this is the result of white people being ignorant about some aspect of racism or lacking awareness, knowledge of racism?
Yeah, I take, as you know, I have a huge problem with this issue, with this concept, right? I find it untenable and I find it apologetic to endow white people with virtue and almost a childlike innocence when they have to deal with something like white supremacy and racism. The argument seems to proceed on the fact that even when white people do seemingly deliberate acts against racialized peoples, racialized folk, that even those acts where they directly benefit from it are done out of ignorance. And I think that what this sustains is this kind of cherub nature, this nature that white people are really aiming and willing to learn and to correct their behavior if just the right black person came along and taught them what to do. I find that just ridiculous, right? I mean, we have to look at the historical context. We know that white people have done the same types of behaviors. They've discriminated against black people. They've called black people niggers. They've called black people God knows what other names. They've always vitiated blackness. They've secluded and segregated blackness. To repeat those things doesn't seem to be the work of ignorance. In fact, it seems to be the repetition of historical knowledge about how to treat black folk. So when we see the same thing, ignorance seems to be just an unrealistic apologetic. The other problem I have with this is, as you say, this makes its way into the academy. I mean, the dominant way that we do race and racism today in the university is to endow white people with this type of ignorance. And actually the work that I'm doing right now on anti-ethics specifically responds to this issue, right? That every time we think that we're talking about race or racism, what we do is we elevate white people's morality and their type of character so that they become these very neutral and observer speakers where they can be influenced and allegedly objectively arbitrate racial realities before them. This is all false. I mean, even the work that's done in implicit bias shows that white people have some very deep-seated cultural and unconscious anti-black biases in their interactions and in terms of their social reality when looking at engaging black folk. So to suggest that white people are simply innocent, right, because ignorance does in many ways connote innocence, to suggest that they're innocent simply because they do not know or hence ignorant doesn't really capture the cultural and the psychological works of how racism against black people function. And what this does is this elevates certain black speakers, and this is the really important part. To suggest that white people are simply ignorant and need to be taught elevates certain black speakers to the position of the teacher. And we spoke about this before when I talked about critical race therapies, right? When the black people say, oh, they're ignorant and take on the charge of educating these white people who have committed racist acts instead of ostracizing them or attacking them, they now become that preferred Negro. They become the person that's rewarded with the publications, with the invitations, because they're just trying to teach white folk. The black person that holds those white people accountable for their racist acts and for the effect that those acts have had on other black people, well, that person becomes the radical. So white ignorance is a kind of dialogue and rhetoric that's gained hold precisely because it maintains white virtue. It allows us to see white people as being the good, innocent, intellectual, rational person that can learn to change, whereas black people are the collateral damage of such engagements. Because as that white person changes, black people are still being discriminated against, and they're actually the material, the substance of the lesson. I just find that to be an unacceptable consequence for such empty rhetoric.
Empty rhetoric. Absolutely. In fact, as you said, maintaining white virtue, maintaining white supremacy. One of the important concepts that you shared in your response, you said that there are frequently black people who are in the academy, or even if they're not in the academy, they can benefit. They become the teacher.
Oh, yeah.
If white people
Absolutely.
are ignorant about racism, then I can just, if you get my book, if you invite me to do a seminar or a lecture, you'll be all caught up. We'll get you up to speed and you
Absolutely.
will no longer be racist. I see the power and really the danger of this belief in white ignorance, that even a lot of black people who, they don't have any publications. They don't do any lectures. They don't get a shilling, not one coin, from making an effort to teach and absolve white people about racism. Just that belief, I think it's holding on to, as you said, this empty rhetoric, this hope that these acts, Michael Dunn, Paula Dean, whomever we're speaking about, that these people, they just don't know what they're doing, and that somehow that makes it a little more palatable, a little more bearable for black people, as opposed to just accepting the harsh reality that white people might be ignorant about some things. Racism is not one. Your response?
Absolutely. And remember, in each one of those cases is black people who are suffering. In the case of Dunn, a young black man died. In the case of Trayvon, a black man died. And, Ayanna Stanley, a little black girl died. A family was attacked. Right there, white people are not ignorant of the effects that they have, because that's what keeps them on top. In fact, the proof of that would be the kind of rationalizations they give about the victims in those cases. How is it that white people are ignorant when they're constantly proclaiming things like, he was a thug, it was self-defense, we should support Zimmerman because this also relates to our Second Amendment rights, right? They seem to come up with pretty sophisticated reasonings behind their racism to either support it intellectually or support it through financial means. So then when we say, even though they're upholding these political and, vehement social positions, they're all just ignorance. The poor white people. This is ridiculous. And it keeps making black people the consequence, right? The consequence of their alleged ignorance is our death, especially for black men. And you see, and this is a problem that we have in the academy, because in the university, the way that we talk about ignorance is that person that says, let's dialogue. And I complain about this all the time. I say that, look, it's funny to me that in critical race theory, the most profound person is the ignorant white liberal. Because the ignorant white liberal is the white liberal you can pull off the street, ask them their views about racism. They say civil rights work, white people change, and we should all talk, and that becomes the substance of every academic paper in the university. How is it possible that the non-academic, who simply repeats the rhetoric, the popular rhetoric of white ignorance and misunderstanding and dialogue on racism, becomes the most profound speaker because every paper in the academy is based off of that kind of rhetoric? It makes no sense. And it suggests that the language of ignorance is really part of a cultural and societal propaganda that tells us something about white people rather than the actual research of anti-blackness, white supremacy, and racism. The real issue here is that black people are affected by white supremacy. So we have people like Carter, we have people like Derek Bell, we have Frantz Fanon, we have W.E.B. Du Bois using this specific language. Hell, we even have Martin Luther King using this specific language. But in order to preserve the idea that white people have changed and that white people are making progress, we disown all of our other theorists. We disown our forefathers and foremothers who've created an intellectual basis to understand anti-black oppression. And we replace that with our bourgeois desire to be recognized and accepted by our white oppressors. So we give paper after paper, we present book after book that has no real profound thought about black folk. It simply says we can get along and open up the conversation to let me speak. As if when we go to these conferences and speak with these white folk and they go back to their universities or to their segregated homes, that they're somehow believing that, now that we've had this conversation, I need to divest myself of whiteness. And this is the important part. These conversations, this alleged ignorance that white people have, at no point cause them to ever divest. They never make the mistake in the wrong way, right? So they always make mistakes that seem to perpetuate racism. They never seem to make mistakes to take away racism. They never open up their homes. They never sell their homes. They never give up their jobs. They don't do anything against their white interests. But then when they act in favor of those same interests, suddenly it's black people, black PhDs to the rescue to embrace the white person and make them feel comfortable about their racist acts. This is a real problem. And, as you know, following my segment on Reading News Review, I'm really interested now in researching the way that the black bourgeois, the black academic class, allows white people this type of pass. I mean, this is how we create people like a Tim Wise, where they know the language, they know the rhetoric, but white people are much more comfortable talking to a white person, telling them how racist they are and that they're ignorant, than a black person saying, not only are you ignorant, but your ignorance causes black people their lives because your ignorance is a coping mechanism from your own humanity. That's not what white people want to hear. They don't want to hear that the reason they don't see black people, they don't acknowledge immoral acts against black people, is not because they don't know them or because they're not deliberate, because it's the way for them to cope with the type of inhumanity they constantly demonstrate against darker races each and every day in their own white existence. That's the reality. That's the truth. That's Du Bois's comment that you get out of Darwin. But nobody wants to speak about those type of historical ills, because when you put white people and white individuals in the context of white supremacy, then you're talking about white individuals as white supremacists that deliberately reify and integrate and propagate their own whiteness to their own benefit, so that society and their children's children will have the same end that they do over other darker peoples. But that becomes too sociological and historical, and they keep telling people that we can't be determined by our history because we want pure, rational, and virtuous individuals. It's all propaganda that's propped up by the university. It has nothing to do with the actual historical, sociological realities that confront black people on a daily basis.
Great sound clip. Great sound clip. I hope folks paying attention. In fact, the next time that you hear a black person say, "Oh, it's just ignorance. That's all. They just need a few more pamphlets. That's why this person didn't get a job. That's why they don't hire any black people here. It's just ignorance." Give them that sound clip from Dr. Curry and let them ponder on that for a moment. Just to stick with this, just because I feel it's so important, and it's global. It would be one thing
Absolutely.
if this was just a one time, like maybe once a month. But as I said, this is global. You can talk to people all over the world about racism, and they have somehow concluded that this is just a problem of white people not having correct information that is producing racism. And as you said, which was extremely important, always with the adverse impact being to black people. Their ignorance about racism is never something where 1,000 black people get hired at a company and no white people get hired. That never happens.
Exactly.
It's always to our detriment.
Exactly.
I point to white children as being one of the best illustrations of how white people are not ignorant about racism. And I started just sharing articles and encouraging black parents to share. People always say, well, how do you talk to your children about racism? Just get the newspaper. Incidents of racism popping up in schools happens all the time. You couldn't even catalog all of the incidents. And I said, just in the past 7 days, there were 3 white teens in Oregon, this is my neck of the woods, where they grabbed a black man. These are 15, and 17. They get two white males and 1 white female. They get a black male. They use the white female to lure him into a shed. They beat him with a crowbar, shoot him with a BB gun, and carve a swastika in his forehead. And that was in Oregon. Now, in New Jersey, the white wrestling team, I think it was 8 members, they simulate a lynching with a black wrestling dummy. They have 1 member doing some sort of salute, 2 other members where they have pointy hats on their head, reminiscent of the Klan. This is in New Jersey last week. And then Mississippi, and these are half. There were more incidents than that. These are just half that I recall off the top. And at Ole Miss, James Meredith statue, they had a noose on the statue. White fraternity members, 3 of them, they were the suspects. They've been charged in this case. And then 2 days after that, black female student, she's chased. She says a carload of white men, they throw beer on her and call her a nigger. Just those incidents. These are not PhD white people. These are not when we like to make excuses and say, oh, that's just an old white man. He's past his day and he's just got these ingrained habits and what have. That's just an old white man or an old white woman a la Paula Deen. No. These are 15, 16, 17-year-old white people. And I'll even throw in the incident at San Jose State, which I thought was superb, where these are college freshmen where they put a bike noose, a bike lock around the neck of a black male student. They're calling him 3/5 and fraction, in addition to hanging Confederate flags and swastikas around the room. In my view, these incidents, they demonstrate white children, even at a very young age, develop a highly sophisticated understanding of racism, and that their parents, uncles, grandmothers, aunts, friends have been dialoguing about racism with them so that they can pass on that power and interest in dominating non-white people. Your response?
You're absolutely right. I mean, I'll give you an even better example than that. Last year, there were 2 young black men killed, Eric Glover and Terrence Rankins. They were lured very similar to a home by a white woman. 2 white men killed them, strangled them, tried to dismember their bodies, and then they had a threesome upon their dead black bodies, right? Teenagers, right? So what I would suggest along the lines of what you're saying is that these are not simply mistaken generational views, but these are cultural patterns of how people understand black bodies. And when you're and the examples you're giving, especially when you're talking about nooses and guns in reaction to black male bodies, there's a very unique and specific type of aversion to black male existence that is really kind of based on the logics that the state and the government and the police officers as agents of that state have against black men that white citizens are now trying to take up. So when you see cases of necrophilia where black male bodies are dismembered and white people having sex on top of them, when you see cases of white vigilantism like Trayvon Martin and, hell, I would even put Jonathan Farrell in there, but of course, the Davis case with Dunn. I mean, when you see these types of things happening, you have to think about that not as individual ignorance, but cultural patterns, because this happens all across the country, right? This happens all across the country. And then when you think about this kind of brutality of black men next to the types of sexual brutalities that you also see of black women by these same type of racist perpetrators, then you have to say maybe there's a pattern here rather than individual generational aversion towards black folk. And that's the problem that I have with how we're doing racism now. You're absolutely right. We're trying to make this stuff like, the old folk are going to die off, and these new white individuals are bigger, better, and more moral than their forefathers and foremothers. That's just simply incorrect. White people have been abusing black people since slavery, right? White men have been raping black men and boys since slavery. Poor white women have been raping black men and boys since slavery. White men have been raping black women and girls since slavery, right? It continued in Jim Crow. It happened during black women working in white homes. It happens in terms of arrests where black men are, this is Darren Manning, where he's sterilized by a female cop, where black men are constantly sodomized. This is, Lumina. This is so many examples of this kind of sexual pathology that goes on with racism that it is simply ignorant. And I mean ignorant in the sense of not knowing any better and on the brink of stupidity to suggest that anti-blackness and the effects that anti-black racism has on black people, namely creating their deaths, is simply not related to the historical psychosexual illness and pathologies that white people have of black bodies. We can't keep trying to excuse white people individually, right? We know that historians like Charles Payne have suggested that this was part of the Confederate strategy to make people see or believe that racism was individual and not structural, that it wasn't cultural. And you have people like Robert F. Williams and Huey P. Newton trying to show people that if you don't understand white supremacy as a cultural repetition, something that is dynamic and reproducible from generation to generation, then you will never understand racism because you don't have a clue about how it's produced, how it is societal, and how it is reproduced and nurtured in the womb of a white republic like America. We're not talking about abstract theoretical issues here. You can look at the consequences of this type of thought because you see all the dead black bodies, specifically the dead black male bodies. You see that. So to suggest that it's just all these bad individuals that have these thoughts without understanding that these individuals' thoughts are being cultivated by images like in the media, and being cultivated by anti-black messages in the home, and being cultivated by notions of criminality and danger from their government and the police state, then you're never going to get why these people are put in those types of situations. These are social barriers. These are boundaries that they're creating for black folk. It's just like Alfred Wright. This man was killed up here in Texas. He was married to a white woman. They tied him up, cut off his ear, slit his throat, and now people don't want to investigate that. I wonder why. What is it about black men dating or marrying white women that becomes such a problem? Right? These are historical and systematic ills.
Context of White Supremacy. Associate Professor at Texas A&M, Dr. Tommy Curry. Before I move forward with the dialogue, just you speaking as explicitly as you do about this problem, racism, white supremacy. As you pointed out frequently, you feel it is a big issue. Many of the non-white professors, black professors in the academy do not speak out accurately, honestly about racism, white supremacy in an effort to appease and keep white people comfortable in the maintenance of their system. How have you been able to continue your academic career? How have you been able to get around those pitfalls that are normally put in place for black scholars who make an effort to really speak honestly about what it is that white people are doing to maintain white supremacy?
No, that's a very good question. I mean, generally, it's a very simple answer. I grew up in the South, so I'm used to white people not liking me. And that's that's basically it. I come from Lake Charles, Louisiana, so I grew up in a city that was segregated, especially during the 1980s. So there was constant racial aversion, constantly places where you couldn't go, and there was constant, disgust in the eyes and minds of white people that even looked at you, right? So when you transfer that into the academy is a conflict-averse type of institution. It's where people go because they're allegedly interested in, academic talk, and they try to avoid social conflict. That's why there's so many passive-aggressive personalities in the university. For black people that come up and speak seriously about racism, they're ostracized. So they're really segregated outside of the mainstream of the university, and they try to punish you. So the idea is that if you speak about this racism, then we're going to say bad things about you. We're going to say that you're not rigorous and that you're ideological, or in my case, you're not doing real philosophy. And these things allegedly are supposed to bother black people, because if you don't win the affection of your oppressor, if you don't win the affection of even the alleged white liberal who thinks that they're not a racist because they can tolerate black folk, then somehow you become labeled. And this stuff happens to me all the time as well, right? I'm labeled as ferocious, combative, angry, abrasive, same stereotypes that they've historically used against black men. The only difference is that I made sure that I got tenure extremely quickly, right? So I wanted job security. And once I did that, I did it, I said the same thing before then, but once I secured that, then I said, well, look, things come as they may. The reality is that we need black intellectuals that don't have a problem talking about what it is they study. In other words, I study racism, I study white supremacy, I study white people, so I'm going to communicate the findings that I have of white people. And white people are very uncomfortable with that. They much rather be the observers, the ones that get to interpret the rest of reality. And they become very defensive, and it's a cultural response. They become very defensive and even, violently angry when black people put them under a lens and study them and their cultures. So it's really that kind of thing, that when you make yourself the enemy of white supremacy, the white people who benefit from white supremacy try to come at you. And I think that what many black academics do is they rationalize their subservience to these kind of dynamics by saying, well, I want a job, or I have to do this to get tenure, or I want to get this book published, so I'm going to have to just kind of take it. I've heard tons of conversations like that. Like, oh, Tommy, I really agree with you, but, I want to get this published, and I want to, what do they call it? I want to beat the system from the inside, right? And, these become just rationalizations for how, a lot of black people do their scholarship. That's their choice. If they really feel that's the only way they could survive. But I think that one of the things that my work shows is that doesn't have to be the only way for you to survive. You can tackle your oppressor. You should not write so you have an audience with your oppressor. Rather, you should expose your oppressor for what they are and take it from there. And I think that as things progress, I think that, or at least I hope as my work is read by more people, that they can see that even if they don't believe the work, they can believe the journey, that you don't have to simply become a yes sir, no ma'am person to white people in the university just because you want employment. I think that rolls back decades upon decades of black intellectuals, and it at its core really destroys the basis of black studies. We need more courageous people, like Derek Bell says, we need bigger, more courage to really be more ethically ambitious when we talk about black folk, because right now we basically sell them at the conceptual auction block. We let white people make them into whatever they want to make them to sell their projects. And, it's a shame, because we have people that refuse to read beyond the soul of black folk for Du Bois, and will make Du Bois into a Deweyan or a pragmatist, or make Du Bois into a Hegelian or a German idealist, simply to get currency and to have conversations with white people in philosophy, despite every black person I practically know proclaiming that philosophy is the most racist discipline in the university. But it amazes me that in the most racist discipline in university, so many of us get along so fine with it. I have a problem with that. I think that if we could accept that these disciplines, especially things like philosophy, are racist, then we shouldn't get along with it. We should be the person that the discipline points to as the troublemaker. Because once we admit that it's racist, then it is incongruent with our existence. And us being in it, if we're doing the work we're supposed to do, means that we're in fact an enemy not only of the white people in the discipline, but the discipline itself.
Wow. What suggestions would you offer? I know we have some in our listening audience who are grad students or professors, faculty members, what suggestions would you offer? I thought that was excellent how you talked about you made an effort to get tenure as soon as possible so that then you could have a little bit more stability in doing the work that you do, being a troublemaker, combating racism.
Right.
What other direct practical suggestions would you offer about how folks can go about doing that work without putting their career, well, I guess if you're doing your job, your career will be in jeopardy, but
yeah, unfortunately that's the reality. I mean, let me give you a really short anecdote. Like when I was coming through grad school, right, I got kicked out of a program at DePaul University because I wouldn't budge on how I interpret critical race theory, right? They were teaching this very continental Eurocentric canon of critical race theory, and really trying to teach everybody to just love each other. And I thought that this really did violence to the field. At that point, I knew Derek Bell personally, and I've been reading his work since I was 13. It was my main debate argument. So I really went in there to say, no, look, black people have contributed, and this is the field that we made. And in other darker races, Asians, Native, indigenous peoples, etc., Latino, Latinas, Chicano peoples have developed this field and carried it further beyond just reading Foucault. And I was kicked out of the program. And one of the things that people tried to make me think, and this is important, what they tried to make me believe is that since they did not accept me, that no one else would accept me. So it's one of these things where people try to convince young black people, especially young black males, because there's so few of us in graduate school, that if we do not live up to their expectations and do what they say, that we have no academic future, right? That we simply can't contribute anything intellectual unless it gets their stamp of approval. And I would urge people to resist that. I would urge people to simply just dismiss the ridiculousness that white people claim on your intellectual heritage and your intellectual capacity. Because what we realize is that that's not what gets people jobs anyway. You see, to get through the academy, to get through the university, and this is what they don't teach people, you have to know other people that support your work. So it's not really about merit. It's not really about what you write. It's about who recognizes and who likes what you write. So for those young black graduate students who are trying to write certain things and trying to get certain things out, I would urge them to reach out to already tenured professors, specifically tenured professors at research institutions. Not that you shouldn't reach out to other people, other intellectuals at state institutions, not that they're lesser intellectuals, but the research institution intellectuals are going to carry more weight in terms of getting you tenure. So what happens is when you go up for tenure, you need those letters of recommendation. You call on those people that you've made connections with. You call on those people that you've talked to, that you have personal relationships with, X, Y, and Z, right? And see, this is the system that white people have used for decades upon decades, but they want to pretend that it's objective. They want to go through and pretend that, it's not that anybody knows any of our reviewers. It's just that these people saw their book, and they read their book, and they thought it was brilliant, and they said, let me send in a letter. That's complete bullshit. That is just not how it works. People get jobs because they know people or they have inside tracks in departments. That's how it works. So white people say, we have two faculty here from Notre Dame, from Harvard, from Yale, MIT, etc. Now this other guy, he got his PhD from these same places. Let's bring him into the department. That's how things work. So because black people don't have the type of representation that allow us to do that, the way we have to do it is through the back door. We have to make connections with people who are tenured at research institutions because they're always going to doubt the credibility of who your letter writers are when you're black and doing this type of work, and say, look, I'm a young person. Here's some of my work. I know you're busy. Perhaps we could have a conversation. You have to make the effort to make those types of inroads. Because if you don't, then you inevitably are going to be stuck trying to be friends with white people to get tenure, which can work. I mean, people have done it, but it's a very precarious road to travel because you can't write anything too radical. You can't disagree with the fields too much. So when those people come to you and say, I'm trying to work in the system, what they're really trying to say is, I'm not trying to piss off enough white people so I can still get tenure, so they'll like me enough to write letters for me, or they'll like me enough to give me a job, or they like me enough to hire me. And this is the kind of, carrot/stick that they hold in front of us. That if you don't do what we say, if you don't write what we write, if you don't do or think the way that we think, you will not make it in the academy. And people have told me that since I got out. You know, people have told me that since I finished my undergrad, that if you keep writing this stuff, you'll never get a research position. If you keep writing this stuff, you won't get tenure. If you keep writing this stuff, you'll never get X, Y, and Z. And it amazes me because I've always had a 4.0 in college. Yet, despite my merit, it's always been a cultural issue about how they can pressure and repress what I want to say because of what I study. So it's important that we understand how nepotism and how networks work. We have to build those things amongst ourselves, and that's the way that we're going to counteract the ability and the hold, the grip that white people and white faculty have over our own destinies. We're going to have to start working through black people, and that's unpopular because most black people in the academy, even brilliant people like, you know, people like a Lewis Gordon or a Charles Mills, aren't really accepted by mainstream philosophy. And these brothers are publishing fantastic works, you know, revolutionary ideas on social contractarianism or the suspension of disciplinarity, etc. But because of the kind of racism in the academy, people are not taught that you should really try to reach out to these individuals because these people have a certain type of knowledge about getting through these types of disciplines. Well, this discipline is specific philosophy, but the same thing exists in every other discipline. So we really have to strengthen our black networks and really understand what counts and what gives people jobs and tenure in the university.
Wow. I see some folks dialed in with questions. I want to get them. Just one point that I do think is
yes, sir,
immensely important. And I've said this before. If you were a white person and you were inclined, you had the same interests that you do now, publishing, doing the same research, you, I think, would be respected. Oh my gosh, this white guy is doing cutting edge work, talking about race and issues of oppression, and I just feel it would be drastically different. I feel like you would be given every opportunity. You would be one of the folks that they would call to be on CNN. We had the travesty and the Michael Dunn verdict. Let's get Dr. Tommy Curry. Tell us what's going down. Just what a stark difference it is to be a white person where you can come and you can say all of these things that might be considered radical and nonsense, foolish, your angry research that you're doing on racism, all of that would vanish, and you could be doing the exact same thing if you are a white person.
You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you a funny story real quick. People used to think I was white because of my name. So before I started presenting everywhere, you know, people would read something that I posted up or something, they thought I was a white person. And when I did my postdoc at Penn State, I was approached by a faculty member who told me I had to read this review. I had just written a review about Shannon Sullivan's book, right? And they thought it was a white person that wrote the review of another white scholar's book. So they were just touting it. Like 2 or 3 of them came to me and were just, this is the best review, and this person is brilliant. I can't wait to meet him. And then I told them, well, look, that's me. And then suddenly the whole conversation changed. Right. So you're absolutely right. Like when people think that you're white, making the same types of arguments, you get profound. You get all kind of acclaim and recognition. But because I'm a black male, and this is important because I'm specifically a black male, the university seeks to silence me in a lot of ways. To say, well, look, you can't speak. You're not sensitive enough. We're speaking from this black male position, and we think that's illegitimate. So there's all kind of ways that they try to silence, debase and disregard the types of things they say because it comes from a black male body. So you're absolutely right.
Just about what I thought. See if we can get a couple callers as we go through. I think this might be our caller in Alabama. Did you have a question for Dr. Tommy Curry?
Yes. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I was just... How you doing, Dr. Tom Curry?
I'm good.
Yeah, I was just wanting to know what you thought about how kind of like the media, how they kind of pit Juror 8, how they kind of scapegoated Juror 8, made it seem like she's the one to blame for the outcome of the trial. Mm-hmm. And even though she said herself that she wanted to convict him of second-degree murder, it seems like the masses of the white people didn't catch that because it seemed like when I saw Jordan Davis' parents, they spoke out about her opinions, and it's kind of like they scapegoated her, ignoring that she said she wanted to convict him of second-degree murder, but it was others. And I'm assuming, I don't know, but I'm assuming it probably was the 8 other whites who in the jury that did not want to convict him of second-degree murder, at least. You see what I'm saying? And
yeah.
I just wanted to know your opinions on that right there. Now, I'm in my line.
Now, if I'm juror 8's the young black woman, the 21 or 22-year-old, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I think a few things are going on there, right? I think you're right in the sense that she said, look, I was still going for murder, so I don't think it's correct to scapegoat her, right? I think we need to kind of separate two issues. One is her role as a juror. As a juror, she says, look, I thought he was guilty, I wanted to convict him, so I think that's kind of an open shut case right there. I think she arrived at the right decision based on whatever evidence she saw before her. I think the problem becomes, or the reaction, and this is the problem, the reaction that the black community is having to her is that she's culturally dislocated because she didn't understand how racism did play a role, even though people said it didn't, right? So on the one hand, black people know that race pretty much affects every decision in our daily lives. And for this black person to get, this young black woman to get up on TV and say, oh, this had nothing to do with race, this was just about a dog killing a boy, really does kind of take some things out. Like, where have you been? Are you not paying attention to how white men specifically react to young black males? Now, there's two ways we could look at this. On the one hand, I do lean towards that side. Like, we do need a very serious race consciousness when we walk into jury rooms and when we have any kind of official, state capacity, right? But on the other hand, I think that the reason that this has been blown up so much in the media is that it makes the white liberal who points to racism look good. So now the white academic, the white liberal could say, see, we're race conscious, and that black person isn't. And from the things that I've seen on Facebook and the way that so many people are liking and sharing these kind of blogs about Juror 8, that seems to be exactly what's happening. See, we have to be very aware that the way that white people use us against us is to make us believe that white people are more like us than other black people. That white people understand us, that certain types of white people really are our allies, and these other poor black people who are just uneducated aren't really part of the program. And that's very dangerous. Right, and I think a lot of black bourgeois academics believe into that nonsense. What Juror 8 represents is a failure of us to constantly culturally inculcate black children and our black youth with the realities of racism. That's a failure on black people generally and part of the society that we live in. To scapegoat Juror 8 as if she's the reason that Dunn didn't get a murder 1 or 2 conviction is just inaccurate. That's not what happened. Right, so I think we have to be careful on how we try to place blame and how we try to understand the role of our own people in racism. We can certainly perpetuate it, but I think when we start making each other the cause of it, then we have a real problem. The court system, the police system, that was the problem, right? The problem is that a white man can kill a black boy, and then we have to have this trial about self-defense. That's the problem. Her lack of awareness is a problem, but it's not the same problem that led to not convicting Dunn.
And I kind of feel like I kind of agree with you on somewhat because she said he was a nice guy. But in another way, like, I don't know, Gus, you could probably stop me if I'm wrong, but in another way, she might not know it. But in my opinion, I'm not saying that she was being codified, but in kind of a way so passionate, to me, it seems like by her saying this was not about race, it was about justice. To me, that was kind of sticking to Nita Fuller's code because she knows as a black woman that she would have been attacked for saying it was about race. So, like Nita Fuller said, right? Yeah, like Nita Fuller said, just say it is about justice. Because if it's about justice, at the end of the day, it's going to benefit black people anyway. We don't even have to say the word race. We can just say we want justice, and then down the line, it's going to end up coming to racism and white supremacy anyway. You see what I'm? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, but here's the question. The question is, was she actually being the trickster character that you're suggesting, where she didn't say it and just said justice so it wouldn't inflame anything, or two, does she really believe that? I think sometimes. You see, and this is, I guess, the kind of problem I have, is that sometimes I think we give black people too much credit. And I'm not saying you're wrong on this. You could absolutely be right. But I'm saying that, like, even when we talk about things like Obama or Sharpton or anybody else, right, we give black people too much credit. So we say they're doing this to, manipulate or get around white people when we have absolutely no evidence for it. Right, and I think that's just as dangerous as the person who's colorblind, because if the black person is actually in step with white supremacy or bourgeois economics or is just a venture capitalist and we're apologizing for them because they're black, then that blinds us to some very real ways that black people perpetuate white supremacy and still hurt black folk. But in her case, I mean, who knows, I think the scapegoating is, or at least the academic scapegoating, has been overblown and really not captured the reality of what's going on with that case.
And could I say one more thing and I'll be done? I kind of noticed, I could be wrong about Jordan Davis' parents, but I did notice this with Trayvon Martin's parents. Stop me if I'm wrong, because like I said, I could be incorrect, but it seems to be that in the beginning, like when the cases start, even the parents, they self make the same statement the young girl made. That's why I don't put age into it. Because they be like, oh, this has nothing to do with race. I do remember this clearly with Trayvon Martin's parents. Yeah. They were trying to avoid the whole racial issue. But then when they see the killer gets off, all of a sudden now they want to jump on the race bandwagon. You see what I'm saying? But at first,
I'm with you.
At first it was... They were all apologetic and stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, here's the reality. I mean, they're still trying to win people's hearts and sympathy, right? Because they need a public to believe them to try to put pressure to get this conviction, right? They have to come out looking like the victims, and they know that if they said this was racist, immediately they would lose all white support, even white liberal support, right? So, like I said, some of that's political. It's just very difficult to tell at what point it becomes political versus just blindness, right? And I think that's something we have to keep talking about. I mean, we have to talk about jury. We have to talk about Davis's parents. We have to talk about Martin's parents. We got to talk about Farrell. But again, to me, the problem is still the system, right? Because what we do is we're judging black people and their reactions against the fact that some white person just walked up and killed black people. Right? I mean, our reactions are after effects to what's already happened, namely the murder or assassination of young black men in this case. Right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Oh, yeah, by no way I'm blaming the victim, but I'm just pointing out what I've noticed.
Oh, absolutely.
And, like, I kind of think, like I said, I kind of suspect that they were practicing racism, just by bringing her out. And thanks for answering my question. And I'm going to continue to listen. I'm meeting my line.
Person that dialed in, last four digits, 8423. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Hi, yes. Good evening, Gus, and to the guest, Dr. Curry. My question, Dr. Curry, good evening. My question is this: as long as we're living in a global system of white supremacy, would it be logical, in your opinion, for white folks to ever allow us inside the institutions to kind of turn over the apple cart and teach something other than white supremacy?
No, I mean, they simply haven't done it. I mean, the work that I'm doing now, even in philosophy, is trying to show that their acceptance of black figures is really based on them making these black figures like Du Bois into white figures like Dewey or Hegel, right? So there's this kind of cultural assimilation where any knowledge that could be revolutionary has to be de-radicalized so that it could be seen as academic or disciplinary knowledge. So they're not, so it's a program where any black person that gets into the university is repressed and is subject to such, repression that they're going to have to fold to either A, get the job, or B, keep the job and get published. And I think that that's why the notions we have of diversity and representation in the university is really flawed. And we can see this all through the types of things we study in the university, right? So every black person is a progressive. Every black woman is practically a feminist, right? These are very safe doctrines. These don't speak to any radical or anti-establishment kind of foundations. So they just let black people in knowing that they're going to act right, and that in both of these cases, if we're black progressives, we're going to attack black working class people and pathologize them, or even black radicals, and if we're black feminists, we're going to attack black men and then every other black woman who's not a feminist because they're under false consciousness. And then, the university continues to work the way that it works. I think that, when black bodies is simply not enough at this point. We need cultural and paradigmatic changes and challenges to Western notions of disciplines and even Western scientism in terms of how we study and explain the realities of black folk and other oppressed people.
My second and last question is, as long as the system of white supremacy exists on the planet, do you think we would, at this point, be able to create our own institutions that are truly free of their control, would they allow this under this system if we wanted to start our own institutions and be free of their control economically and in every way?
Well, there's always been maroons, right? And I think that this is what we're talking about, kind of a maroonish culture here, where we're in institutions because we need the root resources, but we have the freedom to create organizations that support and nurture black genius. And I think, like the organization that I'm now president of, Philosophy Born to Struggle, I think that we have those types of capacities, that we could do that. We have those capabilities. We can create organizations that nurture black genius and black intellectuals from a very rich black organic intellectual standpoint. And then we could take those black intellectuals, try to get them jobs and put them in universities and let them get tenure and keep the process going. I think the problem is that most black intellectuals simply do not see the need for institution building. So when you don't create your own institutions and create your own structures and your own networks, then inevitably what you have to do is depend on white people, and then we get into the same conversation of, will white people let us do X? When in reality, if we supported each other, we supported these networks, we supported these visions, we can do the same things for our own selves, right? Everybody at this level pretty much knows how to write a paper. You get enough people that can write papers together, and you start forming, you say, look, I'm going to support this person, I'm going to cite this person. And citation is immensely important. I've constantly talked about this, like how we need to cite each other. We need to make it deliberate that every time we write a paper, we cite as many black people as we can in that paper, right? We can do these things ourselves, and we can start putting people's names up to say, we want this person to be an editor. We can start petitioning publishers to do those types of things. But we don't organize. We don't build up institutions. And if we do organize, it's only on the back of the white person that likes us. So we'll say, well, this white person has connections. Everybody flocks to that white person to try to get some of the power. Rather than saying, look, we have enough black people here, and we band together, we could have our own power. We could have our own institutions, our own journals, our own printed presses, our own series, etc. Right? So it's the same old thing that, Woodson was talking about, right? The black intellectual alienate other people that look like him or her and compete with him or her to maintain the image that he or she is truly a black intellectual. This is the danger of the bourgeois class.
Great response. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to continue to listen.
Thank you for the question, sir.
We had other folks that dialed in. Just really quick, if you could emphasize the importance of citing other black scholars. How does that help them? Why is that so important?
No, this is, this had to be a year or two ago. I wrote a paper about the need or the politics of citation. And what I suggested for black people in philosophy is that they no longer cite any white person that talks about race without an investigation of whether that white person gives the proper credence and the right intellectual genealogy that owes their work to black folk. So in other words, if a white person writes a book and they don't mention any black person or don't say, look, I got this from this black person, then you don't cite them. Right, and that pretty much excludes all the white people in philosophy. And you make a deliberate effort to only cite black philosophers. So if I'm going to write a paper about racism, people could cite my work. They could cite James Hell's work. They could cite Dwayne Tunstall's work. They can cite Shike Jeffers' work. They could cite Charles Mills, Lewis Garden, Outlaw. We have enough black people that have worked on the issue at this point that they have people to cite. But what they do is they cite popular white people. So they'll cite Peggy McIntosh or Tim Wise, because those are white people that other white people know, right? And what happens is those white people get more and more credit. They elevate more and more in the field because now everybody, thousands of students are citing those people. Whereas you have people like William R. Jones, McClendon, Gordon, Mills, etc., who've been writing all these things for 30 or 40 years. Right. So I think that in order for black people to really take hold and change, and this is the important part, by citing these people, you change the impact factors of the works and the journals they publish in. So if you want to raise the profile of a journal, right, then you need to say, okay, well, if this journal publishes more black people, I'm going to cite more of these black people's work from that journal because that's going to raise the profile of the journal. And if you know they're already sympathetic, that journal is sympathetic to publishing black people, now you can say, okay, well, now I'm going to publish there too. Because now that all these black people have been cited and you know they're going to support black people's work, you want to go to that journal. Like, we have the power, like I said, we have the power to control certain things. It's just that people aren't making direct and political actions and agendas towards what we can control. If we didn't cite any more white people, if we refuse to cite white people who don't defer or give intellectual credit to black genealogies, then we lessen the value of their work, because that means then the only people that are going to cite them are white people. And then we have a very real argument for why are white people making arguments about how good somebody is in race when these black people objectively have better impact factors, when these black people objectively are publishing in journals that focus on race with better impact scores, right? We can determine that popularly, but we don't want to do that because, as you know, when I introduced this argument, people were like, well, that's racist. But my question always is, well, they don't cite black philosophers who work on race now. They just had an APA presidential address where they're allegedly talking about racism, didn't cite one black person. Or if they did, I think they cited Shelby because his work resonates with analytic philosophy. But they're not citing black people. They already don't cite black people as is. So what difference does that make? Black people have to take control of their own intellectual productions and how it's valued. It's a very simple process, and citation pretty much solves the problem.
Wow. Great information. Unless I have been misinformed, why I think this is significant, I try and point it out as we roll. I believe when you said Shelby, you were referencing Shelby Steele at Stanford University?
Oh, no, Tommy Shelby.
Tommy Shelby, okay, thank you.
Yeah, he wrote We Who Are Dark.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the correction. Make sure I didn't get my name.
No problem. That's my fault. I should start saying first names.
No worries. No worries. Person that dialed in, last four digits 5321. 5321. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Hello.
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes. Good evening to Gus, callers, and Dr. Tommy Curry. How's it going? I had a question. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the whole sports and all the football and basketball, and with Jason Collins and Michael Sam coming out saying, "Oh, I'm gay," and this, that, and the third. Well, putting out their sexuality, and then for some reason these guys, like last night, I was watching ESPN, and Jason Collins had an interview, and it seemed as if he was bothered by the many questions that the media kept on asking him in regard to him being a homosexual. And the same I heard about Michael Sam as well, where he's saying, like, wow, like, there's too much attention being focused on my sexuality, quote-unquote sexuality. However, they're the ones who are coming out in the interview saying that, hey, everybody, I'm gay. So what is your take on that in regards to, all right, you're putting your information out there, wanting everybody to know that you claim that you're homosexual, and now you don't want too many questions, or everyone is not to focus on sports and not focus on my sexuality. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's especially important for black males, especially in like the NFL and NBA, to announce that they're gay, right? Because I think that there are stereotypes about black men, specifically in those two leagues, as being nothing but thugs, gangsters, and rapists, right? So I think that it's important that these men feel very secure, safe, etc., in announcing whatever they may be, right? In terms of whether or not they're getting too much attention or people are focusing on that, I think that in a certain aspect they're right, because, you know, when white people announce they're gay, people say, okay, you know, there's a gay player, there's a gay X, Y, and Z. But for black people, it's a spectacle. And, you know, I think about that show The Wire, right, where they had the gay thug, right? And everybody kept obsessing over that image, like the gay black man who's a thug. And I think it has the same type of cultural resonance, because people view black players in the NBA and in the NFL as thugs and criminals. We saw this with Richard Sherman, right? So I think that when you add this to it, white people and white culture, and in some cases black culture, doesn't know how to exactly process that. So I think it's an important statement, but I think that instead of it being directed as, well, there's too much attention to it, we need to start saying, well, then why is there so much attention? Why is this capturing the white American imagination the way it is, right? Because we saw the same thing with Richard Sherman. This cat has a 4.0. He makes one comment. He suddenly becomes a hyper-masculine, hypersexual, aggressive thug, right? There's a certain type of spectacle that white people put on black men's sexuality, be it heterosexual or homosexual, and I think we have to pay attention to those different dynamics.
Yeah, definitely, because I'm in the New York area, and I noticed the cover of the New York Daily News, and the headline was,
well, Jason Collins was on the cover and it said, "Come out and play." I said, "Oh my goodness, these people are just making a spectacle out of the situation." It is.
But see, this is what always gets me, right? Like, we've always had black men who have been openly gay in our history, right? I mean, we had people like Elaine Locke. Augustus Deal actually was a boy of Du Bois, and he wrote the Brownie books with him. Like, we have a history full of black men and women who were gay. You know, Angelina Grimke was gay, right? So we've always had these individuals. I think the problem is that when we marry athletes to this type of, sexuality, then it becomes something of a spectacle and kind of, the erotic for the white imagination. Because, like I said, I mean, we have a history of white people raping black boys and raping black women. So when you think about that, what does the gay black male body look like? What is it really saying? Or how do they, fantasize about the black gay athlete? I think this is what we're seeing unfolding, and part of it is that sexual dynamic of racism. But as I've said earlier, a lot of people don't want to touch that. Nobody really wants to study it. Unless you're going to talk about the black gay body, or the black queer body or the black queer body in terms of identity politics, nobody really wants to hear about the ugly histories and kind of, homoeroticism that racism carries with it. We want to separate that into queerness and into gender. We don't want to talk about it as part of racism. Because I think that's why there's this obsession with the black male athlete who comes out as being gay.
Also, I have one other question regarding the NFL and the N-word, that they're trying to penalize players on the field for using the N-word. I'm just trying to figure out, how can they even police that? Let's say if a guy makes a great play and his teammates want to congratulate him and say, "Oh, good job, my nigga," or whatever. How do you police that? You get a 15-yard penalty for that. Like, how do you even police that in the NFL? How does the referee police that on the field?
Look, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I think the whole conversation around, like, even when the NAACP tried to bury the N-word, I think these things are stupid, right? I mean, because again, this is how people police black people, right? If a culture says we have a word and we have a meaning for the word, nobody goes to France or to Asia saying your word can't mean X, right? But when it comes to black people, white people feel that they can police, punish, and prosecute black people for doing something they say don't do. And this is just ridiculous. And then you got black people buying into this nonsense. Like, well, the word is evil and X, Y, and Z. Well, if we were really serious, and I'm very serious about this, I don't want you to take me as flippant. I'm being really serious. If we are really serious about what words mean and suggest that words that have a historical meaning cannot change or their meanings cannot change, then black people should be just as offended by words as freedom, given that it was denied to us. We should be just as offended by the word black. We should be just as offended by the term Afro-American, because T. Thomas Fortune used the term back in the late 1800s to suggest that black people were actually losing their Africanity, right? All these things should offend us if we're being historically true to the meaning of words. But somehow none of it does, right? The American flag should offend us, right? Just like the Confederate flag. But these symbols become safe, right? So when I hear things like, let's police the N-word or let's punish people for the N-word, I really do see it as another way for white people to really encroach upon the popular culture and the nuance, or the parlance, rather, of black people and their own self-determination. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it only speaks to the type of racism that white people want to have over how black people speak and how black people understand themselves.
Yeah, I agree. It's like another form of controlling black people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, if it's a question of professional standards, maybe that's an argument. Right, yeah. But in terms of it being part of this larger social conversation about black people need to stop saying the N-word, right? Or if black people say the N-word in rap music, it gives white people no, white people saying the N-word comes from a very real sentiment that black people are inferior, right? This is Hosea Easton, right, at the turn of the 19th century. That's what the nigger word means when white people say it. Don't come and give me a context of black people taking it back around the 60s and 70s and say that somehow means that white people are psychologically corrupted by the use of it. This is ridiculous. It's historical ridiculousness.
Yeah, because I saw this on ESPN as well, because they had a special on the N-word, and they tried to use indirectly place blame on rap. They showed the 50 Cent video with Kendrick Lamar. 50 Cent said the word a couple of times. I was talking to a buddy of mine we chatted about it, and I said it's like they're trying to place the blame on the rappers. However, these same music executives, the people at the top, they're the ones who give them the okay on any music that they put out, whether it's talking about shooting people that look like you, robbing you, selling drugs, and things like that. However, if they put out a song not using the N-word, or just talking about positive things, or they're gonna shut the top label executives, the powers that be, who happen to be white people, they're gonna shut that down. They're gonna say, "Nah, get that out of here. We don't want that. We want to feed the people the negative stuff." They're gonna say, "Get that out of here." So even on that level, I know where that's coming from. Like, the powers that be are the ones who are most responsible for this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for
But those are my questions.
No, thank you for the question, sir. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Person that dialed in from a blocked number. Do you have a question for Dr. Curry? Your line should be open. Block number? Person that dialed in from a blocked number. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Tommy Curry.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask a question. What do you say to black people that when you talk about white racism and whites killing blacks, they always say, well, blacks kill each other too. How do you respond to that?
I mean, there's a difference between killing people for racial animus, right, which is what white people do, and then black people fighting over resources or because of poverty or, any number of things that happen in actual communities. The problem is that they try to mix the sociological cause of violence, which is people living in close quarters fighting for resources, right, which not only happens in the black community, but also happens in the white community. So white people kill more white people than any other group of people, too, right, because there's more of them and they live closer to each other, right? So what they try to do is they try to make a sociological fact like people who live next to each other generally kill people that live next to them, right, and mix that with a criminal issue like white vigilantism or racism or racial animus, right? So I would pretty much tell them that they're trying to excuse racism. I would call them a racist because I think that the way that black-on-black crime is depicted is that black people are more dangerous to themselves than any white person could be. And that's just historically false, right? So what white people do in saying that is that, oh, well, why do you care about George Zimmerman or why do you care about, Dunn? Because y'all kill more of yourselves than anybody else would. But even in making that type of statement, people are not understanding that black-on-black crime, no such thing exists, but we're just using this title here, that allegedly black-on-black crime is really the product of the type of isolation and racism and poverty and discrimination that you find in these urban communities, the same way that you find the same types of crimes in poor white communities. But they don't point to the fact that poverty causes people to fight, kill each other, etc. They try to make it a racial issue and then use that imagined racial issue, which is really just a class issue, to disprove their racism. It's smoke and mirrors. It's a way for white people to generally excuse their type of racism and racial violence and hide it behind this other more racist idea that black people just want to kill each other anyway, so it shouldn't matter. And I think we have to attack white people that make those types of arguments. I think if any black person is stupid enough to make that argument, we have to attack them too.
Yeah, so I thought. Also, one more question I want to ask you.
Sure.
I was listening to Dr. Claude Anderson, and he's saying that so-called black leaders, they always want to fight everybody else's fight except for the black fight, and no other leaders like Hispanic or Asian or whatever. They don't talk about multiculturalism. They just talk about their own issues.
Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that if our so-called black leaders would actually fight for our own issues, that we could probably get things done. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that we avoid the issue of race and racism. I think that's just true, and I think that our leaders, be they intellectual or political, simply don't want to deal with the realities of racism. Right now, I was telling somebody this the other day. It is much easier for a black person to talk about abstract issues of exclusion or even gender in the university than it is to talk about racism. So if you go up talking about racism, calling white people racist, people alienate you. But if you go around calling people sexist, people are fine with that, right? So there's something about racism that really, draws a very sharp line in the sand, and people don't want to step on that intellectual political powder keg. And I think that you see this reflected even in the, at large conversation we get in society, that you can have someone like Michelle Alexander published a new Jim Crow that says, look, the war on drugs, even under Obama, has really done all this to black men. And then, Obama just kind of says, well, let's just change a few laws about marijuana. Let's not really address racism. Let's just decriminalize some things, right? I think that's an avoidance. So I think Anderson's right.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's all I need to know.
No problem.
Thanks.
The person that dialed in, last four digits, 0068, 0068. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Curry. Hello?
Hello? How you doing, sir?
I'm doing just fine. My question for you is, this is going to be very, very, very candid, okay?
Sure.
The black people that I see, they seem to be stupid, retarded, don't know what's going on, don't care what's going on, say that they want to be successful, say that they want a lot of money, say that they want instant gratification now, say that they want to have fun. And sometimes it's just, I end up getting the feeling of just no point of talking to people who don't want to help themselves. They don't even want, they always talk about what they want, and they don't want any help. They also say they don't want any help getting to the place that they want to get to. And I just want to know, like, how do you deal with that? I'm talking about the people who don't know about any of these issues, political issues that we're talking about. I'm talking about those people. You know what I mean? Like, how does that ever frustrate you? Like, when you just, you can see right through them. Like, just...
Yeah, I mean, look, it's all frustrating, right? I mean, and I want to just kind of, preface this. So, I mean, I come from a place where a lot of people are like that, right? A lot of people are not educated. A lot of people are seeking instant gratification, et cetera, right? So, I mean, you see that every day. But on the other hand, I also work in a place where I see black people who have PhDs that don't have a damn clue about racism and haven't read a book on black people their whole lives, just one or two chapters to make other white people believe they know something about race, right? So I think there's both sides of that, right? Now, in terms of specifically dealing with people who are not focused or aware of the problems that surround them, I mean, look, that's the point of education. And it's a frustrating process because you're not dealing with people who are going to say, well, look, the first thing on my mind is how to deal with white supremacy. The first thing on their mind is, A, how to get some money because they're hungry, or B, once they get the money, how do they make themselves feel like they have some kind of enjoyable standard of living or quality of life. So those are just the real realities of working class black folk. I think the best way to deal with that is to still make the attempt. I mean, we have to still engage the public. We can't just say that because black people don't have the same sensibilities, or working class or poor black people don't have the same sensibilities we would like to see in them, that there's somehow a lost cause. I think that's a mistake because we still have poor, illiterate, and ignorant white people, and they still organize and form things like the Tea Parties and take over governments, right, or state governments. So I think that we have to be more generous with how we think about black people and how we need to both utilize and educate a working class black population.
Okay. Now let me hit you with this. You say this to them, and they tell you, well, you can see that their response is, "Who the hell are you?
Sure.
Wow. You're not nobody. You're not somebody that is somebody. So why am I paying my attention to you?" So how do you deal with that?
Hey, you tell them, like, look, you're right. I may not be anybody, Do me a favor. Read this. Let's talk about it. If they resist it, do you move on to the next person, right? I mean, the black intellectual, I mean, assuming that we're talking about like a black academic talking to, working class black folk or, poor black folk or the population you're describing, we're not the saviors of all black people, right? I mean, our job is to try to educate, and if we can or we feel that we fail at that, then, we have to move on. We just can't redeem people's souls, and it's certainly not our job to make judgments of those people if they can't or if they don't get onto the program that we're trying to sell them on, right? I think that sometimes, and I understand your frustration. This is not me dismissing your frustration, so please don't take it that way. But I think that sometimes what we do in the university is that we cultivate this view that we're the prophets, and that if nobody gets down with the message, then they're just condemned. And I think we have to take a different approach. I think that even if we can't get them to see the point that we're trying to make, we have to respect the situation where they are and try to meet them halfway or even meet them there. So in a world where they say, well, who are you? You're nobody. It's like, you're right. But let's talk about, voting. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about themes that we think could move the black community and black people forward, even if it's not a deep conversation about white supremacy, racism, political economics.
And you find this successful, even though you can clearly see that their attitude and demeanors are more so of you really don't, they think that you don't even give a damn about them, even though in your mind.
Yeah, well, look, man, I mean, back in the day I used to work for urban debate leagues. I did chess camps. I did, academic at-risk programs. So I've seen a lot of different, personalities, from lower-class black, people. Who are who come from situations or places that I came from. And sometimes it's hit and miss, man. I mean, like, even where I grew up, people thought that, I was called acting white or talking proper, et cetera, thought I was better than people because I did things differently. We have these attitudes in our community. So I'm not trying to sell you on the fact that these are always going to be successful. Sometimes it just is what it is. Sometimes people won't listen to you or people don't value who you are. You just move on. Right, but I've also I've had a good amount of those, right. But on the other hand, I've had things where people say, you know what, can you tell me more about X? Or I have young brothers like, I'm just so impressed that when people talk to you, you can just cite books off the top of your head. Can you teach me how to do that? Right, so it's a mixed bag. You know what I'm saying? And I just think that we have to take the opportunities that we see, and if we don't see opportunities there, we try to create them. If we can't, we move on because there's always more work to do. It's not about saving each individual soul. It's about trying to create conversations in communities. And if we can't create a conversation in that community, then there'll be another community that we can. That's just how it happens sometimes.
And my last question is, did you start with your people in your family first, or did you start people outside of your family?
Well, that's interesting. Where I'm from, most black folk, well, I'll put it this way. In Lake Charles, Louisiana, most black men don't like white people anyway because of the way the city is set up, because of the racism there, right? So that's not a hard sell. I think that, but at the same time, I think that in my family, there's very sharp class and education divisions. So I think that, what I learned to do in my family is really how to translate the things that I was learning in university and make it just kind of part of our everyday conversation. And I think that the strength of doing that is that it really did make me aware that a lot of people, because I went up north to get educated, allegedly, right? I went to a northern college, and a lot of people think black people from the South are stupid. So I never wanted to perpetuate that. So I became very sensitive to how I speak to people and how I say the things I say to make it connect with their real lived experience. And I think that strengthened it. So, yeah, I started there, but then I was always doing things like, debate camps, urban debate leagues, that type of stuff. And it really kind of expanded because I was able to affect more young people than I initially was just by having, conversations from the things that I learned when I was in school. So, it was kind of a both-and approach.
Thank you very much. That really helps.
No problem.
The person that dialed in Lashes, your line should be open.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Good.
I have a quick observation. You mentioned the importance of words, and lately I've been having a very hard time with two words, ignore and ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I have a problem with both words because they both have the same root word, but both have totally different meanings. Like, for example, to ignore means to refuse to take notice of, to reject as ungrounded or neglect. Now, ignorance speaks on the meaning of lacking knowledge or comprehension of things specified. And I find it really, really difficult because I see it, both words, as an act of deception within the context of racism, white supremacy, especially when white people like to label themselves as ignorant on racism, which I find to be impossible because how can a perpetrator of a crime claim to be a victim at the same time? It's just absurd to me. Now, when you mentioned how some black scholars or black people as a whole do not put any importance to cultural institutions. I think the reason that is due to the fact that some black people do not understand the true meaning of culture and what it entails. Because I have come to the conclusion that racism, white supremacy is white culture, period. And this weekend I went to see a documentary dealing with black women in the ivory tower and how they experience racism, white supremacy on the job. And some of them were discussing those who are aspiring to be tenure or never got the tenure because of their race classification under the system of racism, white supremacy. And I come to the conclusion, too, that academia is in a peril in the sense of most professors, for example, are going to be losing jobs. Most of them are losing jobs due to corporatization of university as a whole. So once these black professors or doctorates, what have you, even graduate students get paid like peanuts doing all this scholarly work in the name of trying to get a degree in either their PhD and what have you. I just really do think they need to start thinking of other alternatives if they really truly want to educate pupils or college graduate students. And these black female professors also shared how their white students, especially their white male students, challenge them in the class in the sense of, oh, even though you're a doctor and you have a doctor in XYZ, you really don't know what you're talking about. Or if you say something out of line, I don't agree with your premise, depending on what course this black professor is teaching, I'm going to report you to the dean, and you're going to suffer some serious consequences. So I just want to know, what is your thought on that? And on also why black people do not have culture institutions, because they do not understand the true meaning of culture and how it operates.
Right. And I think your analysis is spot on. I mean, I know sisters in academy do have that problem. For sisters, a lot of it deals with authority, right? So you're right. There are certain cultural norms where black women are not taken seriously as knowledge holders and authority makers in classrooms. I think black men have a different problem. I think for black men in the classroom, it becomes an issue of saying something that's threatening, right? For us, it's always about threatening people perceiving us as combative and ideological. And I think that that's how those kind of stereotypes are amplified in university, because university is a white supremacist and white racial salient type of environment, right? It's all for white people pretty much. And anytime black people are there, you're the speck of diversity. So I think those sisters were actually we're pretty accurate to what the literature says about their experiences in the university. In terms of whether or not or how people understand culture, I think you're right. I mean, you're hard-pressed to find anything in white culture that doesn't have some remnant of white supremacy in it, right? I mean, this is from, especially since I do philosophy, this is from the very notion of science or metaphysics all the way to the notion of democracy, right? These things all have remnants of the white racial personality in them. That being said, black people are not, as we talked about earlier, are not rewarded for pointing these things out. Black people are rewarded for coming into an institution, trying to make friends with everybody, and then saying on the basis of that, hey, I can work with what you're giving me. So I know Dewey's races, I know Hegel's races, I know Kant's races, I know Hume's races, I know all these few races, but I'll make it work, right? That's what they're rewarded for. So when you say, well, they misunderstand culture, you're right, but they misunderstand culture because they're being either A, forcibly made or coerced to engage it in a certain way, or B, they're just miseducated, because you go through grad school for 6 to 8 years and people just teach you that you can, change this or tweak this and it works for you. So they're not going to understand white culture as being something that's fundamentally averse and antithetical to their own racial being. In fact, most black academics are taught that they shouldn't emphasize race too much. They're there for diversity. They're there for racial and phenotypical representation. They're not there based on, race black consciousness in a strong Beethoven sense, right? They're not about being black each and every day. It's about kind of performing blackness and then getting people to empathize or sympathize with you and say, oh, that poor black, that poor black female professor, look how hard she works, X, Y, and Z. So there's different ways that we manipulate recognition in the academy. And I think again, this is the problem, because when we appeal to recognition, right? So when a black man comes in and says, well, I'm going to do X because I know this person likes X, or when a sister says, I'm going to adopt a feminist label because I know that that's where the political power is in the academy, those things don't focus on black people. They seek to manipulate black people and black people's vulnerabilities in a very specific way so that white people recognize the black people they're talking about and give them the credit for that, for sharing that information with them. So they don't see the need to build their own institutions because they're fundamentally dependent and invested in white recognition and white institutions.
And my last observation I learned last week on this program was when we had a non-white classified Asian guest on the show, and she was talking about rape and racism. And it dawned on me that rape and racism go hand in hand, like
Absolutely.
A coin. One is heads and the other one is tails. And the fact that both words, rape and racism, uses the first two, similar letters, which is R-A. So that really struck a chord with me. And the deception words used for both words, rape, which is sexual assault, that's a deception word in my book, and racism, the other deception word is, what's the bullshit word they use? Discrimination, bullshit, something to that effect. How they use those two words to cover, instead of saying explicitly, this is rape or this is racism, white supremacy. So what is your thought on how rape and racism go hand in hand?
No, look, at the beginning of the program I started off saying that, rape and racism, or rape and sexual violence have always, or racism and sexual violence have always been part and parcel of how we understood racism, right? And the example I use for that is that when we talk about rape, we usually do it under the kind of historical connotation that white men raped black women during slavery, right? But we know from really good work by people like Leslie Harris, James Hook Stewart, and Thomas Foster, that there were also mass rapes of young black men and boys by white men and white women. So what in my work, what I'm trying to suggest and show people is that, look, racism has always been about rape and sexual violence because it's been a way to utilize the black body, both male and female, for whatever kind of desire or power they saw fit to place upon it. And what we've done is we heterosexualize the notion of rape so that it only affects female bodies without understanding that when people get, plungers or guns shoved up their anuses, because this is what happens to black men on a daily basis in this country, right? They're constantly sodomized by the police officers, batons, guns, things of these sorts are constantly shoved into 8 screwdrivers. I had a brother in Chicago, who had a screwdriver shoved up his anus during a cavity search. These things happen. So when we don't contextualize rape in terms of male bodies and only leave it kind of to the recesses of, the female body, then I think we miss a large aspect of how rape and racism work hand in hand to not only discourage but denature the types of humanities and really the person that's involved to that. Because rape, when we think of racism, we're like, people are not respecting people's humanity. When you think about rape, you're actually denaturing that person's humanity. You're making them something that you want them to be at that moment to only please your sexual or racial caricatures or desires. And I think that because we have such a heteronormative basis of how we understand rape and historical violence, that we're missing a large part of what it actually meant to be racially subjugated. Because all those brothers, sisters, and children were raped by white men and white women. And I think that when we miss this, we also miss the role that white women played in the sexual violence of black men and black women too. Because we give them a free pass. Like, they're women, so surely they didn't rape. That is just not true. That is historically false. So we need to really pay attention to how white womanhood is intimately involved with rape culture and sexual violence against black people, especially black men. But people don't want to open that box because we still buy into, and this is the problem with black people in the academy too, they still buy into the kind of salience of the black male rapist, where they just don't want to interrogate white women and white men for what they did to black men and black boys. And that's a real problem. So I think you're right. I think it's historically existed. I think people like Angela Davis has already pointed this out, in some of her early works in the Black Scholar in the late 60s. And I think that, as this research becomes more popular, that, is going to kind of drive these conversations home. But I think that we still give white people way too much credit in terms of their virtue and in terms of what they did or did not do. So we'll emphasize something like Eldridge Cleaver was a rapist during the Black Panther Party, during the Black Power movement, but nobody mentions that, white women have been raping and brutalizing black men and boys from slavery all the way through Jim Crow. And I don't understand the reasoning for that. Like, if rape is rape, then why aren't we talking about people who rape?
Exactly. And this is a perfect segue into the media promotion of whites marrying, procreating with non-whites, whether they're classified black or what have you. I see this as a remnant of racism. And a lot of the non-whites, whatever classification they fall under the system of racism, white supremacy, cannot fathom nor comprehend, gather that the person they're with who is white is actually using you and using you as a sexual ploy and practicing domination and also practicing better refinement to allow racism, white supremacy to persist in years beyond. What is your thought on that theory?
No, I think, I refer to it as the, my wife and I constantly talk about Olivia Pope. I mean, it's the popularization, right, of the black middle class at this point, and I think that especially when you have these shows that try to create caricatures of black women's experiences under the title of, well, this is what a black successful woman looks like. In this case, we're talking about, her relationship with, the white president. I think that it does create an idea that really devoids the type of violence that happened in interracial and intersexual relationships, right, or interracial sexual relationships. It just doesn't capture that. And then I constantly hear these kind of apologetics where black men have always, wanted white women, but but again, these things are caricatures. I mean, this is the kind of made-up history you get out of Michelle Wallace's The Black Macho, not the actual history of what happened when black men even looked at white women, right? I mean, when you have, and this is the problem with how we understand knowledge. When you have someone make up a history that says that all black men desire civil rights because they desire white women, but then you completely ignore the fact that maybe black men don't really desire white women because, I don't know, the last time we had this conversation in Birth of the Nation, lynchings increased, and anytime they were accused of it before then, their penises were cut off and they were lynched and their bodies burnt. Like, why are black men not cognitive agents of the fact that if you look at a white woman, you end up like Emmett Till? But we erase all that violence, and now we have these kind of caricatures of history that said, oh, well, black men have always done it, so let's create a female character that does it as well. Not looking at the fact that the consequence of these types of images, when they're not problematized, because remember, black people are being told, don't question these images, just accept them. Black men are saying it because they want to control your sexuality, ladies. Don't listen to any of their arguments about the violence that came along with interracial sex. Just buy into Olivia Pope. When you have that type of propaganda, what it means is that we're not examining the types of violences across the board that happened to black women or to black men who sought to intervene in the rape of their wives, sisters, etc. Because those black men were killed. Like the scene in The Butler, right? He talked to the man who raped his wife and he was shot in the head, right? Come on, I mean, we have to do better. I mean, we can't, when we make things into identity politics and just say, who's got the white person now, who's sleeping with the white person now, that's not a real analysis about black people or white supremacy. It's an analysis of what we ultimately desire because of the cachet and currency that whiteness has in our society. But it does not talk about what black people need or the dangers of those types of relationships, especially for young black men if they try to pursue them in this country. Because they're going to be accused of rape. They're going to end up like Alfred Wright, though it means death in a very real sense.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate your feedback.
Well, thank you, ma'am, for the questions.
The person that dialed in 2516. Actually, before I'm going to nab your question, just you mentioned I've been writing names down of different titles, perhaps potential guests in the future. You mentioned Thomas Foster. Have you read his book, Sex and the Founding Fathers?
I haven't got around to his books yet. I've been reading a few of his essays because I've been interested in how he's looking at homosexuality and masculinity in the 1800s. But yeah, I have that book is on my reading list though.
Okay, I'm looking at some of his essays as well. Just quick titles before I hit our next caller. One is The Sexual Abuse of Black Men Under American Slavery.
That's my favorite.
Okay, we'll put a star on that one, and then Deficient Husbands, Manhood, Sexual Incapacity, and the Male Marital Sexuality in 17th Century New England.
Yeah, it's pretty good. pretty good. Like, I mean, his research is really interesting because it changes the views of how we think about masculinity, even for white men, right? That there are certain aspects where women could shame men, and we have this very kind of top-down dominant view where there was no homosexuality, there was only this heterosexual puritanism where not black men, where men were completely dominant. He provides some really interesting evidence that that's not the case. So yeah, his work is really fascinating to me because of that, you know.
Wow. Adding that to my reading list. Alrighty, person at 2516, your line should be open.
Yes, I came in late, so I came in the middle when you were discussing the word nigger. Are you really trying to justify the use of that word, especially when it's tied into ridiculous images of black people, especially on music videos? And my second question is, would you think that a non-white person that left jail, well, not left jail, was released from jail, and says that when he's angry, he says that I will beat your, ASS, and I will wreck you. Well, actually, I will F you in the ASS. Do you think that his sexuality has been compromised? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, to the first, I don't know if I'm not really making a justification. I'm saying that if black people as a culture, if the black community has said this word means X to us, right? So if black people use nigger and say that it has a certain meaning, then I don't think that it's up to white people to legislate what that meaning is in that culture, right? So I'm not saying that every black person should say it, or I'm not trying to justify that it should be, just popular speech. But I'm saying that if a culture has made it popular speech, then who are white people to come in and say that you can't say a word? That's my point, right? That's the second question. Because the reason for that is that I don't think that happens in any other culture, right? Cultures determine the meanings of words and their own symbols as they see fit. So it's the same way that Asians are using the word yellow or ninja to mean whatever they want. Nobody tries to legislate them. So the question is, why specifically do white people feel the need to control and legislate the meaning of this word in the black community? And it's another question about the his sexuality compromised. I mean, it depends, right? I mean, there are brothers who are gay who go into prison. So if somebody comes out of prison and they're speaking from their own sexual, position or orientation, then I don't think that's a compromised sexuality. However, we also know that prison rape is a real occurrence in prison, that brothers who go in many times as young children into juvie are sexually assaulted and molested. Now, in that case, I think there's a real question of compromising sexuality, or rather coercing people sexually, because those people are not asking to be raped. A homosexual person is not asking to be raped either. But I'm saying that I think that there's a unique type of abuse there, because you have young boys going into the prison system that are being raped by grown men or being abused by guards, and this has some very real psychological effects on them, right? So I think that if somebody said that, I don't know the exact context, right? I don't know if they're saying it because they've been abused in prison, or they're saying that because they're angry and that's just what they're speaking. But I think we have to pay attention to the actual realities of rape in prison and how it violates both hetero and homosexual individuals, within the walls or behind the gates.
And the reason I asked that question is because, to me, if you would say something that horrible, it has to be something on the inside of you to make something like that come out. To me, you just don't say something like that flippantly, or if it doesn't have any meaning to you. And maybe not you've not maybe been raped inside the prison or jail or wherever you were, but maybe because of the environment you were in, it influenced you, especially when there's no women around. That's the best way I can articulate it.
Yeah, but look, there's all kind of research. Well, even this research is racist because it has the view that black men are the biggest rapists in prison. So, look, there's all kind of things that go on in prison that we don't know about, and there's a lot of assumptions that people make about the people's sexuality who are going into prison, and assume that if they come out as gay or homosexual that they weren't that before they go in. And I think all these are problems in terms of how we understand black people. The reality is there are black people who are gay that get locked up. The question is their sexuality, are they abused in prison because of that, alongside other young black men and boys who are not gay, who are also abused by other men in jail? I mean, those are kind of research questions. I mean, the literature on that is very scarce because people don't want to touch it. But I think that, I'm not really willing to assign pathology to anybody who says that without knowing something about the person, or at least what they tell me about themselves.
Right. What if the person never spoke that way before he was incarcerated?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, man, it's all assumptions, I mean, I could assume that the person didn't speak that way because they were straight, and then I could build up a narrative. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was true. That they were speaking that way because they were sexually abused in prison, right? Like I said, I mean, I think it really comes down to whether or not that person was abused, or if that's them just saying what they were saying on the basis of whatever,
Right. And I wasn't coming from the context that they were necessarily sexually abused or raped or whatever. I was just saying maybe even their mentality was corrupt because of what they were in. That the quality of the milieu of the penitentiary or a prison or wherever they were stationed.
Right. And you see, and this is a real controversial issue I don't think people talk about, because, I mean, Eldridge Cleaver does have a text that talks about this, where he talks about how the prison does make black men more effeminate to feel like they have freedom, right? But at the same time, in that same text, he admits that he's a homosexual as well. So, yes and no. I mean, is there going to be that type of convergence or in prison? Perhaps. But again, I think it's important to understand that we can't look at prison as somehow corrupting, the pure heterosexuality of black men. I think we have to be very realistic that some black men are gay and go to prison. It's not like prison makes straight men into gay men automatically. And I think that in the black culture we have some of that stereotype going on.
Right. I have another question, if it's all right. I was sat back in a corner, especially at work, and just look at white men, and I may be reaching, but this is just my feeling. Even the ones that are the so-called big strapping farm boys, to me they seem very feminine in the way they walk and the way they hold their hands and the way they gesticulate. I just wanted to get your opinion about that. Did you notice it seems like they're more effeminate? And I'm not saying they're homosexual, but I'm saying that to me it seems like they're more effeminate than any other men in the workplace.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that. I haven't noticed anything like that before.
Okay.
Thank you for your questions. Person that dialed last four digits, 0949. Let's see. Give me 1 second. I'm trying to. Okay, got you. Last four digits. Oh, sorry about that. 8235. 8235. Your line should be open.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Lee Carey.
Yes, sir.
I know it's an SIU student here at Carbondale, but I have a question. Do you think that I guess this is for basically like the children. Do you feel like that like the black folks should parents should homeschool their children instead of putting them in public school? Because it seems like to me that the public school is not really designed for black folks for having like an African centered education or something like that, where basically because education is can be a form of education is political too. So I'm thinking that in a sense that like because all you do is learn about like, oh, we were slaves and stuff like that. You don't learn before that. You know what I'm saying? You don't learn that like, you know, we are the original people of the earth. We're the first people, so we're the first people on this planet, and basically like how like, you know, the resources like, you know, of colonialism, and basically like, you know, we were kings and queens, and basically we had like our own societies before white people, the terrorism of this white supremacy that came with something like that, and basically how like you know, we helped build the pyramids and all this stuff. We had like a civilization way older before it's even a place, but before even Europe or Greek or any of these people ever formed a civilization or something like that. And it's in a sense that like it feels like, you know, the miseducation. I don't know if you read the miseducation of the Negro.
Yeah,
or, yeah, and like I don't know if you're familiar with John Henry Clark.
Yep, he was a Schomburg student.
Yeah, so I mean, I want your opinions on that. That like for like, you know, schools that independently schools that's African centered or homeschooling or something like that. For
no, absolutely. You say you're a student at Carbondale?
Yes.
Okay, you're taking Black Studies courses?
Yes, I took a couple of Africana like studies. I'm a philosophy major, so I mean.
Really?
So I was planning on going into like Africana studies. So it's like, you know, going for grad school for Africana studies. So it's basically.
Okay, you're a philosophy major at SIU.
Yeah. So, you know, putting things in an African centered worldview. You know, what do you call it? Instead of putting stuff in a Eurocentric view.
Right. No, I'm well acquainted with it. Yeah, you know, I'm from Carbondale too. I came through that program, so I was just shocked. I was there not too long ago. Yeah. So look, bottom line, I think that there's nothing wrong with adopting an African-centered perspective when we're talking about methodology. Right? Mm-hmm. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is the work of, as you just mentioned, you know, Carter G. Woodson. He also wrote a book that's now published by Sala called The Appeal in 1921 that makes the very same argument. You look at Antoine Furman. You look at, Joseph Lucis Janvier. You look at, I mean, all these brothers are doing the same project. Their argument is very simple, that in order for us to have a notion of civilization where black people are active participants, and in order for us to build that civilization forward, we have to have a knowledge about our history. I completely agree with that wholeheartedly. Right? I think Woodson is correct that if you take black people, you don't teach them anything about themselves and only show them that white people had civilization, then those black people will stop thinking black. That's John Edward Bruce's point. They will no longer think black, but they will try to imitate their oppressor. Right? They will imitate their laws, they will imitate their economics, their philosophy, etc. So I'm completely on board with that type of methodological program. I'm not so much into romanticizing different aspects of Africa, though, and I think sometimes the African-centric paradigm also goes too far in that direction, where we kind of make up a mythology. Now, I know that we have some Egyptologists. I know I heard Mario told me that they had one brother that actually was doing Egyptology, and his work also borders on that, where we actually engage in the historical materialist study of African civilizations. I'm all for that paradigm, right? I'm just not into kind of the idealism that we make of civilizations and say we're going to try to emulate ancient pre-colonial Africa in the 21st century. That's not kind of my stick. In terms of homeschooling, or even African-centered, schooling, I think those are fantastic ideas. I think the problem is of course the fact that you're talking about working-class black people trying to either afford, private, education, like an Afrocentric education, or B, they don't, because they're both working class, they don't have the time to homeschool their own children, right? Because homeschooling is largely a luxury for middle class and upper middle class or rich white people who are able to have one person or one parent stay at home to educate the child while the other works. Unfortunately, black people don't have that kind of economic luxury. So I think it's out of reach for many black people. But that being said, being in Texas, we've certainly thought about homeschooling ourselves because of that kind of, as you say, the anti-black curriculum here. So I'm down for both of those options, largely because I think compulsory public school education is anti-black, right? Especially in Texas, I think the education system is designed to make black people and brown people hate themselves. And I think that you get that not only through the political ideology, but through the kind of pedagogy that insists that no black person or brown person or indigenous person ever contribute anything to the wholeness of humanity. So in trying to circumvent that, I think that you have to look at those two options seriously.
All right, thanks.
No problem. Good luck out there, man. I was a philosophy major at Carbondale, so
right.
you know, I know what you're dealing with.
All right.
Person who dialed in last 4 digits. Might take me a moment to find the number here. 6582. 6582. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Good evening, Dr. Curry.
Good evening, sir.
I just have one question for you. Do you belong to any Greek fraternity?
I do not. I was invited when I was an undergrad by the Alphas and Omegas, but I did not join.
What's your opinion on Greek fraternities, especially the black ones?
Yeah, I'm kind of torn. My wife's a Zeta, so we have these arguments all the time, right? On the one part, you know, just historically, I think they were good, right? Historically, I think they came out to really create lettered men and women, representative men and women that, you know, exemplify the excellence of our race, right? They were community-based, they were academically based, and I think that they had a rich sense of, you know, giving back to community. I think they were activists in that way. Today, however, I think it, like most things in our culture, has been commodified, where it's a symbol of membership to a group that can and does exclude other people purely on the basis that they paid dues and they went through a ritual. So in that sense, I don't think that it connects as richly with the black community as it should. So, you know, I'm kind of half and half about it. You know, my wife takes her membership pretty seriously, and I respect that. But at the same time, I do have criticisms of it because I think it just reinscribes certain types of social exclusions that aren't always beneficial, especially at the undergrad level. Now, I've seen some graduate and professional, you know, people that I've been extremely impressed with. But at least in the undergrad level and some of the graduate culture, just the popular culture around it, you know, it's less than impressive. But, you know.
Thank you for answering my question, Dr. Curry.
All right, sir. No, thank you for the question.
Right on. I think we hit everybody who had a hand up. Glad lots of folks were able to get their questions in. It kind of came up in your response to some of the callers where I think you touched on within the system of white supremacy how it is just that is a staple aspect in terms of placing large numbers of dark folks in greater confinement prison. And you said that there will be attempts made, cosmetic, superficial attempts to address this. We're saying, oh, well, let's decriminalize cannabis, and that will solve the problem. That has been gaining huge amounts of momentum over the past, I would say, year, 2 to 3 years, really. I'm in Washington State, where it was legalized in 2012. Also has been legalized in Colorado. Even of late, I know they're considering decriminalizing cannabis in Washington, D.C. I've even seen over the last 7 days that this is also taking root in South Africa, where white folks are stepping forward to say this should be legalized, and they're putting forth a lot of the same rhetoric with regards to health benefits, and this would ease the numbers of people who are being prosecuted for using a plant that's got all these wonderful medicinal properties. What is your view on why this has become so popular? Do you think this is something that's really going to work combat racism, white supremacy, and why do you think so many white people are at the forefront of this movement and mentioning racism when they talk about the need to legalize and or decriminalize cannabis?
Yeah, really quickly, so I think they're on the board because it's profitable, right? So when you decriminalize something, that means that you really can now kind of institutionalize it. You can get a license for it. You can open businesses for it. So that means that white people are going to have the means to do that, and they're going to make a lot of money because of it, right? And I think that the racism language just makes them part of a very liberal agenda that makes them appeal humanitarian. I don't really think it's deeper than that. I think the large problem is that this really doesn't address racism. It addresses how many people get convicted on possession for weed, but it doesn't really address the underlying issue that they'll find something else to arrest black people on, with. Nor does it address the fact that there's a disproportionate incarceration rate for black people who have on possession or drug use when you have the same, if not higher, rates in the white community. So again, it's a band-aid, right? To say that we're going to decrease something in the black community without really addressing the underlying causes and the underlying ideologies that criminalize black people in the first place, right? I think that Obama making this statement, it's hard listening to Obama sometimes, because you really do have these situations where you say, wow, I wish I could really get on board with this, but on the other hand, you're like, but this is profitable, right? It's not like he said, let's legalize weed 4 years in his first term, right? He comes in now and says, weed's been weed forever. People have been having arguments about weed since at least the 1990s. That's when I was reading this stuff, for debate. So people have long known the medicinal purposes and effects of marijuana. The issue is now it becomes profitable to do so. And when you fit in a corporate model or corporatism into how people want to give a humanitarian face to corporatism, then I think you have your answer about why people are seeing this as being a new boom industry that they can say, oh, look, we're really compassionate about people. Because now you could address people who are chronic sufferers of pain, you could address the recreational user, and you have this spin that says, oh, and we really care about black people. So I think it's all for show. I think that, they want to create industries and they want to substantiate markets where people are going to both come to tour these places and be able to get high.
Do you see, because I have heard also a significant number of black people who said, well, hey, this needs to be done like yesterday. This will benefit large numbers of black people who are arrested, charged, end up having really silly things on their criminal record, which can keep them from getting grants, getting public housing.
The last I heard, though, wasn't retroactive.
Well, I haven't heard that either, where it's not going to knock anything, but at least for future younger black folks.
Yeah, well, like I said, look, decriminalization is going to have a benefit to some black people, right? I'm not denying that, I just don't think that it really addresses the larger systemic issue of the prison industrial complex. We have over 500,000 black men in federal prison, right? So decriminalizing weed is not going to address that. It's not going to address the court system. It's not going to address the police and police state. It's going to address people who get caught for possession. And that's cool because it helps somebody, but it doesn't really address the root cause of why so many black men are locked up, right? And that's kind of my problem, is that we look at reforms and, this becomes a feather in Obama's hat when we've had, a rise in incarceration since he's been in office. We have a rise in white vigilantism. We have a rise in black poverty. Him legalizing weed just doesn't impress me given the systemic and geopolitical weight of those other issues.
I know I can at least say for out here in Washington State, I don't think President Obama had anything to do with it becoming legal out here. I think that was large numbers of white people who got that on the ballot and then went out and voted for it. And I think the same.
Oh yeah. The states made their own decisions, but he made a speech recently. I'm sorry, I should have been clear about that. He made a speech recently supporting the legalization of the states legalizing marijuana, and part of his rationale was like, these are good things because it will positively affect, black racist or racial incarceration or charges or whatnot. So.
Right. I don't know if I saw the same interview that you did. The one I saw with, I think his name is John Trapper, white male, where he was giving his response. I think one note of caution that he did toss in was that for folks who think that this legalization and or decriminalization is going to be some form of panacea for the problems that people are facing, he almost said something very similar to what you said, that if Philip Morris and these other major companies decide, let's legalize, and we will supply. We will fill CVS up. You're taking tobacco cigarettes out, and we'll just replace those with cannabis cigarettes. Where he said that could end up not being such a good thing, particularly 5-10 years down the road, if a lot of these mega corporations get into that and you end up having this stuff in Walmart and all the other stores and what have you, that might not be such a cool thing either, which I tend to agree with.
But see, this is the thing. This is what, again, the thing I have with Obama is that Obama's willing to come out and make very public statements about certain things and not others, right? he's come out and said that he's used weed. He's come out and said that he doesn't think it's dangerous as a drug, or he says alcohol is more dangerous, I think, in the piece that I read. And he's like, but I could be president, right? I mean, come on. I mean, he seems to take these very convenient and corporately sponsored popular issues, whereas on other issues like racism, on other issues like poverty, on the other issues like the industrial complex, he says nothing, right? I said it the other day. I mean, he'll come out and fight for white women, even though black people are getting all their civil rights cut back and rolled back to, pre-54 era, levels. Not a comment. But he looks cool because he says, I smoke pot and you can smoke pot too. Those types of things just don't impress me.
Right on. I also wanted to get one other question in. I did see one other person that had a hand up, see if we can nab that as well. This is February, Black History Month. You've done at least 2 reports that I saw talking about how black people don't really have a thorough, comprehensive grasp of a lot of the people who are lauded during this month, whether we're talking about, as you mentioned, Derek Bell, Dr. King, Carter G. Woodson, mentioned on the program, Ida B. Wells, whomever you want to pick out, that people will talk about and appreciate their efforts against racism, white supremacy, but you don't really see how an application of their views, an application of what they were willing to sacrifice in the daily lives of the black people who are wearing T-shirts with their name on it, or saying, oh, I read this person's book, or I know this person's name, they inspired me, yada, yada, yada. Just looking at this month for Black history, things that I've seen, I think we started the month with Richard Sherman is a thug going into the Super Bowl. As the month continued, we got Jason Collins and all the hoopla around him being the first openly gay black athlete, and the kind of spectacle that became. I think even one of the callers mentioned that. I think the same thing with Mr. Sam, young NCAA athlete, first, I guess, athlete to come out at the collegiate level who's going to be going into the NFL, should be going into the NFL, I assume, coming up in the draft. And the Michael Dunn situation where he can kill Jordan Davis and then is not convicted, at least on killing a young black child. This all going down in the month of February. I might have missed something else that stood out, but at least those seem to be...
there's so much.
Exactly. Those, at least to me, seem to be 4 of the major things that went down during this month. And I'm thinking, wow, this is Black History Month 2014. I don't know what that says about the state of where things are going. Do you have a comment on that, or am I putting things together?
No, I think you're right. Look, Black history was started when Carter G. Woodson started Black History Week. It was a way to reclaim history so that we can see ourselves reflected in the spiritual striving towards civilization. And I think what happens now is that black people allow it to be commodified. And I'm very serious. I mean, if you listen to any of my other programs, you know that I say this about black nationalists who want to kind of hold up Black Panthers and the Black Power movement without reading any of them, who've never picked up any of Huey P. Newton or Cleaver's works, who have absolutely no knowledge of the interaction between the Black Power movement and Robert F. Williams. These things upset me. The same way that, I go off on, black feminists who constantly make bourgeois claims about what black women want without understanding any of the ethnological foundations of black people, the home, and black reproduction at the turn of the century. And this is what I mean when I say that black people don't care about black history. We cherry pick icons. We'll pick Anna Julia Cooper and say she's our shining model without being critical of her. Like, why does she support, Christianity? Why was she a Christian fundamentalist? Why was she an imperialist? Same thing with Ida B. Wells. She's one of my favorite activists of the time. But why does she also support imperialism of Liberia and the Philippines, right? These are very real things that we need to do. We need to interact with their thought, and we need to take up the charge. So if we see something like, a Trayvon Martin or a Jordan Davis or a Jonathan Farrell or Ayanna Stanley or Rakim McBoy, if we see any of these people, then why aren't we talking about Ida B. Wells in context of that? Because Ida B. A.B. Wells said that the Winchester rifle has a special place on every family's mantle, because she was trying to say that black people need to arm themselves against lynchings. See, we can recover these our forefathers and foremothers and use them and apply their thoughts to what's going on today, because we still have the same type of anti-black violence that exists in the society and specifically affects our communities. Right? If we want to talk about serious issues of sexuality and sexual violence, then we could talk about people like Huey P. Newton, who said that, we can't get into this issue, this scarcity principle, where we end up talking about sex and liberation and freedoms only insofar as it makes us new capitalists, right? Or even his analysis of the black bourgeois, the black capitalist class, of which Obama is a part of. There's all these different ways that our thought, that a historical thought of our ancestors directly relate to how we understand what's going on now, and we simply refuse to engage it. And it's like I said, we'll pull Martin Luther King out in his speech on the Vietnam War because we want to sound radical on MLK Day before we get into Black History Month. That's kind of the lead-in. Every year you're going to have the MLK birthday bash. People are going to talk about how radical he was, and then we're going to start Black History Month. But they do the same thing. They post the same blogs over and over again. If people want to be radical, start a reading group on where do we go from here. Start a reading group about why Martin Luther King is an anti-colonialist. Start a reading group about why Martin Luther King's philosophies of technology and militarism would actually argue against the use and modernization of drones under Obama. Start those types of conversations, right? But people don't do that. If you want to, let's talk about Du Bois. Let's talk about how he was against Brown versus the Board of Education in '54. Talk about how he was against imperialism, how his arguments against the Cold War. There's so much in our history and our intellectual thought that we can talk about that never gets mentioned during Black History Month because we just talk about the same pigeonhole things, right? We're just not interested. And it frustrates me because as an academic who was talking to other black people and black students, I feel that we should take our knowledge and our history seriously. We should look and we should comb through the archives of what our people have written and what they've reflected about, and that should be part of what Black History Month's about. But we don't get that, right? And a lot of universities simply don't put resources behind Black History Month. Now, they put all kind of things on for Women's, History Month because that involves white folk. But in terms of Black History Month, people just don't care, and we allow them to not care because we don't raise any stink about it. We'll post our blogs on Facebook, we'll share a few blogs on the internet, and that suffices. But then when it comes to who recognize who can talk about the thought of who, we have absolutely nothing. We just put icons. I know who Harriet Tubman is. I know who Anna G. Cooper is. I know who Ida B. Wells is. But there's no application of their thought, and certainly no respect, no reverence for the types of opinions of what their lives meant. It's a sad case.
Dr. Tommy Curry, I want to see if I can nab the other folks that dialed in and had a question. It should be two people. Is that acceptable, Dr. Curry?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Last two.
Cool. The person that called in, last four digits, 5640. 5640. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Hi. Good evening. I'm sorry I joined late. Dr. Curry, what do you think of Dr. Welsing's work or the ISIS papers? I don't want to. At the time that she wrote her work, I guess you could consider it radical. But when when I read her piece, I was really blown away, but in a positive way. But I just wanted to get your view of her work.
Look, Welsing's going to remain one of the giants, the intellectual foremothers for all time. I don't think there's anything I could say about her work or praise I could give it that hasn't already been rendered. But I like her work. Mm-hmm. Given that I'm coming from a different generation, I'm of course skeptical of the biogenetic argument she makes about race. But I think that descriptively, in terms of what she's arguing about, in terms of the psychological paranoia and the kind of genocidal drive of the white race, is completely accurate. I think you even trace it in some of the anthropological writings of people like Hegel and Kant, if you read them carefully, especially Kant's pragmatic or anthropology from a pragmatic point of view. So I think it's on point. I just think that writing at the time that she wrote, there was a strong move to really make race a biogenetic aspect that had a specific worldview that was opposed to the types of tyranny and inhumanity that white people had constantly brought upon the world. But outside of that disagreement about what race meant there, I mean, I find her work, you know, I mean, it's gonna be a historical monument for time upon time.
Thank you.
No problem. ISIS Papers is a great read.
Dr. Timothy Wise referenced her work, Pseudoscientific Bullshit. That's in the archives where we discussed his view of her work on the program.
Wait, he called it. I'm sorry. What do you call it?
Pseudoscientific Bullshit. Direct
as
quote.
Opposed to. You see, now that interests me because I'm curious. As opposed to what? As opposed to the racial theories that it's reacting to, right? Like, you know, you know, I mean, every notion, because race is contrived, because it's invented, it's all pseudoscience. But and as I said, I mean, that's part of my disagreement with it in terms of the biogenetic argument. But to suggest that her argument against white worldview or white racial personality is bullshit simply because you disagree with the causality she makes, I don't see how that follows.
Folks can check out the archives and hear his explanation as to how he arrived at that conclusion.
I'm gonna have to do that.
The person that called in from a block number, last call. Did you have a question for Dr. Curry?
Yes. Good evening, guys. Thank you for being on the show again, Dr. Curry. May I be heard?
Oh, I appreciate the invitation.
And I've noticed you're speaking a little slower because I'm from Texas and I cannot think as fast as you speak sometimes. I wanted to say I totally agree with you about white people doing this solely for the money. I'm on my third career, and I've always been amazed at the conversations that white people have about money. And it's just when we would have meetings, you know, and I'd ask the white guys, what did you talk about when I left? They said, well, all we talked about after you left was the money. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just that's it. That's all they talk about all the time, not around us. But when they are alone, all they talk about money. And I've asked them, why are so many white people greedy? And I've asked this for decades, and never once has any white person ever denied it. They've never denied being super greedy. So I really think the marijuana thing is completely about the money and nothing else. And also, since you get to see your students over time, and you get to notice if they have any behavioral changes, is methamphetamine a problem on campus at A&M?
Are there ever any problems?
Yeah, with methamphetamine.
Oh, with meth? I don't know. I don't know. I'm usually considered the young radical professor, but nobody's ever approached me about that. I mean, I know there's weed. I know with the white kids there's cocaine, but I haven't heard anything about meth.
Nothing there. Okay. All right. I had heard it was a humongous problem in Ryan, and I thought maybe since A&M is next door, it might be there.
Oh, look, I mean, I'm a black cat. I try not to associate with anything that I know is illegal here. You know, so I mean, it very well could be. I just may be a bad source to have knowledge about it.
Okay. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
Great response. Great response.
It's as real as I could be given the situation. You know.
Right on. Folks can get more information if you want to see all the different papers and talks and what have you, or I won't say all, but a significant amount of them. You can go to academia.edu and just do a search for Tommy J. Curry, and his page should pop up. You can download different reports that he has, talks, book reviews, lots of great information. Again, it's academia.edu, and then you can just do a search for Tommy J. Curry. I'll post his page on my Facebook so that folks can follow and get updates. He adds material on a pretty regular basis. Great resource for constructive thought on racism, white supremacy. We are so thankful you could share a bit more of your time with us. Always a pleasure to hear your views.
Pleasure's mine, sir. It's I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity.
Absolutely. We will continue to follow your work, and we will look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Please keep up your outstanding scholarship. And I guess, real quick before I go, I missed one of the names. You said Leslie Harris, Thomas Foster, and there was one other scholar. Was it Hook Stewart? I kind of...
James Hook Stewart.
James Hook Stewart.
Yeah. Hoke Stewart. He wrote a book that documents the largest mass, it's a small section in it, but he documents the largest mass rape of black men during slavery. I think it was 1756. So really, really interesting. If you have trouble finding it, I'll shoot it to you.
Well, I will take you up. I'll see if I can find it on my own first. Thank you so much for sharing the information. Really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your Monday evening, Dr. Curry.
Thank you, sir.
Take excellent care.
I will. Bye-bye now.
Mm-hmm. Context of White Supremacy. Always a hoot. Hear from Dr. Curry. I'm going to get on my job and see if I can put my hands on that article pronto. James Hoke Stewart. I'm glad I remembered that was the one name that I missed in that list. I would encourage folks as well. He said Thomas A. Foster. I read some of the different articles that he's put out that's also dealing with rape of black males during formal explicit slavery. Check out some of his material as well. I think he's a white male. We'll see if we can get maybe some of them to be guests on the program down the road. We'll take a quick commercial break. I'm not thinking of hanging out for the full 3 hours today. But if folks have a quick sentence, we might make time for that. But in the meantime, we'll take a quick commercial break and be right back. And then if you have something succinct you would like to get in before we wrap up, we can make time for that. So you can be thinking of your short, efficient comment, if you have one, in the 3 minutes or so that it takes for us to play the commercial. We will be right back. Context of White Supremacy.
RacismDaily.com, your number one source for global news reports on race, racism, and overt actions of white supremacy. From Asia to the Americas, to Europe, to Australia, to Africa, racism is not a thing of the past, it is our current reality. Be informed, be globally informed. You should be the first to know. RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Do you need a one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs? Triumphant Multimedia is a skilled team of professionals with a passion for great marketing and chic design. Our specialties include consulting, brand development, copywriting, and creative graphic design that's second to none. We also offer photography, photo retouching, videography, and video editing. At Triumphant Multimedia, our goal is to provide highly effective creative solutions built to suit any individual need or budget. Give us a call at 678-732-8067 or check us out online at trimultimedia.com.
Hi everyone, welcome. This is Justice with the C.O.W.S radio program. If you want to learn about, understand, and counter racism, white supremacy, be sure not to miss a C.O.W.S episode. We keep them jammed, packed with constructive information to sharpen your use of words, to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy, ASAP. Also, to be able to invest in my counter-racist efforts, co-hosting the C.O.W.S radio program, please visit my blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
I got an uncle real crazy. My Uncle B, 55 years old, hates white people, married to a white lady. And he's sitting around going, these crackers ain't shit, except for Susan. And he tried to explain the whole thing to me one day, say, yeah, I got a white wife, I love her, she loved me, that's all that matters. But I tell you this, if the revolution ever come, I'll kill her first. Just to show these crackers I mean business. Motherfucking cracker ass, motherfucking cracker. Shit cracker, motherfucker. Hey, hi, honey. Motherfucking cracker, I'll kill my cracker kids too.
Context of White Supremacy. We will be back a little later in the week. Just check the Facebook page, Black Talk Radio Network as well for updates. We will be back before the Friday study session on Madiba's Long Walk to Freedom. We are going to do one broadcast on cannabis one time. And then I'm moving forward. Anything where everybody starts talking about it, which that's my view on the cannabis thing, I kind of lose interest in wanting to talk about it. But a one-time kind of exchange of views, and I will put up front that I'm not really interested in hearing all of the folks the wonderful benefits of smoking, because I'm not really even on that. I'm really more looking at why are so many white people pushing this? Because I've already decided that white people are not going out of the business of racism, white supremacy, and anything that you see mass coordination on the part of whites, I just immediately conclude they're doing this to strengthen the system of racism. Not that I'm totally open to hearing people who have different opinions, but if you are planning to dial in and talking about all of the wonderful side effects of cannabis, I have zero interest in that. But I will give the date, time when we will get down to have the conversation on this. Should be coming up soon. If folks have anything that they want to get in succinctly, and it will have to be very succinct, I am too lazy to go get my power adapter, and my battery has 10% life on it. So you will have to get your comment in before my battery dies, because that will be that. The folks who dialed in who had a hand up, your line should be open. If you have anything succinct you would like to say, if anything stood out from the program or anything you wanted to share, your lines should be open. Oh, nobody has anything to share. That's fine too. Everybody, was everybody good? I'm getting a little echo. So I will take that out. Make sure we don't have speakerphone or anything like that. Make sure you're not listening to the computer. Did anybody have any comments? If not, that's fine too. Everybody can just marinate on what they've heard.
Hey, Gus.
Yes, sir.
I just have a question about just kind of like towards you. Do you like you don't spend any time trying to talk to like the black people that are just like notice that that are completely unaware? Do you try to even like make the effort to like get them to be aware, or you just say forget it you just wait until they show interest?
I have found that works a lot better than trying to force it on people. It's been my experience that when people don't want to talk about racism, I just don't talk about racism. I will wait, because it's been my experience, it's going to come up. If racism dominates the planet, as I say it does, as Dr. Curry says it does, it's going to come up. Whether they're upset about the Jordan Davis situation or the Trayvon Martin situation or the Miriam Carey or Renisha McBride or whatever, it's going to come up eventually. So I just wait. If they're in the television program, Scandal, whatever the case, I will just talk about things that they are interested in and try to steer those conversations in a constructive manner. Sometimes I'll just listen if I'm around black people that I think are more confused about racism or that's not something they're interested in. I'll just listen, because it's been my experience that a lot of black people feel that they are not listened to, that people don't really value what they think or what they say. I've seen where that in and of itself can be constructive, just being a receptive, courteous ear where people can talk and you genuinely, sincerely listen to what they have to say. And I found that that makes them be a little bit more receptive when you talk. If they see that, oh, this person is not just waiting to call me stupid or tell me that I'm a dumbass nigga that doesn't know anything. Oh, okay. And then they might be a little bit more courteous when you do have something to say. But even then, I don't force racism. I wait until it's something that they want to talk about. And then a lot of times I would just take the approach of asking questions to get them to think about what it is that they're seeing, and then I will wait until they start asking me questions about my view to when I really start going more in depth about it. But I generally do not force. It's been my experience that just makes it really, really bad trying to force people to talk about racism when they do not want to talk about racism. I've seen that is highly unconstructive almost every time.
Right there, see, at that part where you said that you would wait until they start asking questions, right? But like, what about during those times where they're talking about how they feel? Because, you know, a lot of black people like to talk about how they feel about things, right? And you don't ever feel apprehensive because they're not asking any questions. They just talk about how they feel and just talk about, you know, and make their own assumptions about why it is the way it is.
I might just ask questions. That is about it, which I recommend all the time. Just stand in the question lane. If they're talking about their feelings, if they're frustrated about their job or frustrated about what happened with the Jordan Davis situation or whatever the case may be, I would just ask questions about their frustration, what they think should be done about that, what they're trying to do to resolve that, or depending on the context of the conversation, I would just ask questions. But most of the time, the driving thought that I have anyway is that non-white people are confused about racism. So I don't expect non-white people to have great knowledge. I don't expect their behavior to reflect someone who spent a lot of time studying and thinking about racism. So I expect to bump into people who are confused about racism. So that's one of the lower frustrations that I have. They have to be like really attacking me or calling me stupid or if they're not doing that, if they're just, you know, confused about racism and saying whatever they're saying, that generally doesn't bother me. I just sit quietly and listen to what they have to say, and I may ask them a few questions.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't bother you that you can see their confusion.
I mean, that's what I expect. I'm still confused about racism. That's kind of the whole premise of this program, that I say that white people are not ignorant about racism. That I have a sound effect that says that only black people, the only people that are ignorant about racism are black people. So that just confirms what I have already concluded, that non-white people, part of a major aspect of our victimization is that we are lacking information, lacking understanding about how to solve our problems and frustrations, and that we don't understand enough about racism to be quote unquote successful on this here planet. So that just, I look at it this way. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised about white people being racist, and I'm also not surprised about non-white people being confused about racism and all the problems that come with and are produced because of white supremacy racism.
Okay, and my last thing to you is so is your conclusion that it's counterproductive to even suggest what to do to the people that you know are already confused about the system of white supremacy?
Oh, if they have a problem and you have a potential solution or suggestion, you can submit. I have a potential means of addressing that problem. Would you like to hear it? And see what they say, and just take it that way. If they want to hear, you can submit your potential solution. If they don't want to hear it, that's fine too. I think that's a constructive way to go about solving problems. But you just take it if the person wants to hear your potential suggestion. And if they say yes, you go ahead with it. If not, that's fine too.
Oh, okay. You asked if they want to hear your potential suggestion. You don't just give it to them. Okay, I see. I think that causes me to be frustrated a lot of times because sometimes I'm so itching to tell them, how easy or simple it is to really correct their thinking. But and what to do, and that's something. So it's just better just to wait and ask them, would they like to hear my potential suggestion?
That's the way that I tend to handle it, and that tends to work a lot better. If they don't, it's no need in me talking to somebody who's not interested in what I have to say. If, no, I don't want your suggestion or what have you. Oh, okay, I won't waste my time. Listen, I'll keep it pushing. No worries.
All right, thank you very much, Coach. That really helped me out, man.
Mm-hmm.
Gus, do you? I think I have a feeling you're talking to the talented 10th, because the concepts that we're talking about, they aren't really very simple. They're very complicated, and whereas we think that people aren't ready to be educated, aren't ready to understand racism in its global and historical context, perhaps they are unable.
That I'm familiar with Mr. Dubois' concept on that, although I think he did renounce that later on. But I don't generally reference folks in that manner. It's been my experience that just a large number of black people function in that way, where they're not really that open or receptive to talking about racism, and particularly getting any sort of direct feedback about how dedicated and deliberate white people are about the practice of this. It's been my experience that people, whether they have degrees or they don't have degrees, typically they are not very receptive. And it could be the folks that I'm around, could be a special population, but like I said, this has been consistent, whether the folks have a lot of college experience, whether they have not been to school and they just have regular jobs and are doing their thing. Most of the folks that I bump into, it's very rare that I bump into people that are just, oh yeah, let's talk about racism, let's talk about white. It's very rare that that I'm in contact with those types of black people.
Okay, so it's very normal. That's a really normal thing. So sometimes I'd be thinking, like, am I the one that's crazy here? Because, like, why am I the only one that sees it here? And sometimes when I bring it up, they just say, why do you always have to bring it up? Like, can you not why you have to always make it black, white? Why you have to talk about, this, like, combat? Like, why do you gotta even go there? So it's like, it's like...
That's typical. Maybe I hope if other people don't have that experience, that is phenomenal. I'm so happy for you, but that has not, my experience has been, that's very typical. Why do you always have to bring up racism? We don't want to talk about that. It can even be hostile sometimes in rejecting that. Or even if they do want to talk about racism, they are resistant to my analysis of racism, or someone like Dr. Curry or someone like Dr. Welsing. There are a lot of people I know that they will talk about racism, but they don't want to talk about it in that way where it is indicting white people as being ongoing and informed practitioners of white terrorism. They do not want to have that conversation and are very resistant to it. So, in fact, if I gave a short example, and this just happened to be someone who was in college, but I mean, I've had people that weren't in college who sounded very similar. There was fraternities came up. There was, or this wasn't even a fraternity. This was the Black Student Union at the University of Washington. They were having a bachelor's auction. That's what it was called, the bachelor's auction for the Black Student Union. And every year, this was their big annual event. They would auction off black males as their fundraiser. And I was appalled that this was going on. Like, this, why are we reenacting slavery as a fundraiser, as a signature event for the Black Student Union? And so we started dialogue about this, and folks were very resistant, same thing. Lots of people were very angry. How could you question this? This is ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, we had some of the members as guests on our program. We had a whole meeting to talk about this bachelor's auction and how this relates to slavery, and is this a constructive thing to do? We brought in 2 white people, one male, one female, and they both said that you should suspect us of being white supremacists. That said, we think that this auction is a bad thing to do and probably reinforces slavery, racism, white supremacy. The conversation lasted for about 2 hours. We got close to the end, and one of the black male officers, he said, okay, I got it. I see what you're saying. I see how the bachelor auction, I see how it connects to slavery. He said, the question I have is, this debate has been going on for about a month. I didn't understand what you all were saying and connecting this to slavery for the whole month. I didn't understand it. and it just didn't make sense to me. Why did it take me so long to connect the dots on this? And I thought that was one of the more profound moments in an evening that had many moments that were just fascinating. But I thought that was one, that he admitted this in front of the whole group, that he just didn't understand why it took him so long to connect the dots. And I've seen that as just a pattern, whether it's resistant. It could be a lot of contributing factors, people having white friends, it being something that people are scared to talk about. It could be a lot of factors that go into it, but just a resistance or a slowness in connecting the dots about racism.
Do you think that we're subconsciously afraid to indict white people?
I think that could be a part of the problem.
Yeah, I don't know too many people that would have the cojones to say there's some people could say racism, but not a lot of people have the cojones to say white supremacy is racism in a college setting.
Gus, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Gus?
Yes.
Okay, today I just came out of my economics class, and one of the things that we talk about, or the professor is talking about, is how the European how the slave trade and the European colonization of Africa did not do any good for Europe, economically speaking, but it only benefited a few white people, like King Leopold, but not really the general economy of Europe, and slavery did not really benefit the general economy of America. How would you respond to that?
Katrina Brown's work is the first thing that popped in my head. She's a white woman. She did a whole documentary that is rather despicable, where her family goes to Cuba and Africa, and it might even be one other spot. I know definitely Cuba and Africa, but they go to all these spots where slaves were sold, and black people were sold and shackled and all this other stuff. But she talks about how the whole town, just everybody, all these white people, everything was about slavery. It was not just the white people who were enslaving directly black people who were benefiting and participating. It was everybody was involved in this, whether it was people in the town who made leather straps so that the black people could be beaten, whether it was people in the town who made shackles, whether it was they made barrels for rum, whatever, whether they were making ships. Everybody was participating in this and benefiting from this. Obviously, you people don't all benefit to the same degree, but it's tons of white people who have scholarship on that, and it's probably other people than that, but I like to pull out white scholars in that instance, not countering what Dr. Curry said, but just in that instance where you got a direct white person who's saying this, something that I believe to be false. I think it's a lot of white people who have done scholarship that just points that is absolutely not true, that you had tons of white people who benefited. And even if you do want to go with white people, Du Bois, this is Black History Month, reference him. Hey, he talks about how the psychological wages of being a white person, even if I'm not sitting on a slave plantation where I'm raking in thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe I don't own 200 or 500 enslaved black people, just the fact that I'm a white person and I'm not one of these niggers, just the fact that I can lord that over them, that has a value for white people, continues to this day to have a value for white people. So whether you want to go that in, or whether you want to go just actually how entire towns and communities benefited and participated in this, as I said, Katrina Brown, that's her whole documentary, and there's other white scholars who've written this out who can document this information. I would ask him, what he thinks of their work. Does he think that they're in error, or, we'd like to revisit this conversation.
Okay, yeah, Katrina Brown with the, how do you spell her name? Is it like Katrina, like Hurricane Katrina?
Right, and then it's Brown with an E on the end.
Okay.
I think her documentary is Traces of the Trade. I could be in error, but, and it's like her whole family. Yeah, she's been on the program, so you can go back in the archives and hear, and then she has like some of her cousins and nephews and uncles, some of these other white people, they've talked about this experience as well, written about it, and talked about how their family and all. I think her family was one of the biggest enslavers in New England, not even in the South. But that's the premise of like her whole documentary and books, is that this was not just something where her family made a lot of money, but this is something that hordes of white people, if not all white people, were involved in directly or indirectly in doing things to support, benefit from the institution of enslaving black people.
Okay, I'll look into her work and listen to the podcast, because the professor, he just says buckets and buckets of words, and I think he's being deceptive, because today in lecture he was talking about like the Congo and how the white people killed. He says 10 million. It could be more, of half of the population in Congo. But he said that only, King Leopold and his friends were the only beneficiaries of that, of the Congo resources. And I just don't think it's accurate, because I think the Belgium benefited immensely of extracting their resources.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's tons of white people who, King Leopold's Ghost, I've read that book. A white person wrote that book where he talks about all of the immense wealth that white people in Belgium accrued as a result of what they did in the Congo. There's tons of white people who've done scholarship on how it was not just the white people directly who were the enslavers, who were benefiting from and participating in this massive enterprise in a variety of ways. It's tons of, and I mean, he might even know this. That's one note of caution that I would put in as well. I think Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson, he talked on the program some years back about how he would oppose white people like your professor. He would stand up and challenge them and call out the racism and what have you. And this is when he was still trying to get his doctorate, right? This is a little different than Dr. Curry. He said he would do all that, and he said that it took him a lot longer to get his doctorate than if he had just, kept his mouth closed and went about doing the business and getting his degree so that he'd go out and do whatever he wants to work against racism. He said that on the program, that's probably something he would do a little bit differently. And he talked about how it didn't really benefit him, pointing out and challenging all of these folks as he went. That's something, I mean, you can make your own decision. Dr. Curry is different because he's actually a faculty member, so that's a totally different conversation, totally different objective. But I think from the classroom, the student position, and I think even Dr. Welsing said the same thing, that she would be cautious about how much of that challenging and such that you do, because this white person, he might have all this information. He might even know who Katrina Brown is and other white scholars and authors who can detail and document how what he's saying is just not true. He might be deliberately practicing racism. So I would throw that in also as just a note of caution about, it might not even be feasible to go down that road. You might just want to get your degree and keep it pushing, man, because I've just seen a lot of times where it has caused more problems, and it didn't change the white person's view at all. They continued saying the stuff that they were saying, and it just, put a bullseye on you to be mistreated with regards to your grade, and even gossiping to other professors and faculty members to make things difficult for you while you're trying to get that degree finished up.
It's interesting how he does it, because he does it with like graphs, and like he tries to mathematically prove it by having the equation like y equals b0 plus b1 plus u2, and then he graphs it, and I don't know, he's very deceptive.
I agree with that. School is all about telling them what they need you to tell them when they tell you to tell it to them. And that's it. That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah, that's...
Don't offer any intellectual insights.
Yeah, like I said, he might have that information already. I wouldn't assume immediately that he's ignorant about what he's saying. He might just, be deliberately trying to deceive folks in the class and practice racism with what he's doing, which is pretty standard from what I've seen at the collegiate level. In fact, that would even be my default assumption, that he probably is doing this deliberately, that he probably knows the truth about what he's saying, because it's been my experience a lot of these folks, academic folks that I'm talking about, white people, when you challenge them on things, it's not like they've never heard of the people that you end up referencing. It's been my experience that these people read a lot of material. The guy that we had on, who's director of the Africana Studies program at the University of Montana, I think he said he had read over 100 books in the last year, and that's probably not even counting essays and little articles here and there and blogs and what have you. I mean, these folks, they're steeped in information all day long, all kinds of information, dissertations and everything. I mean, that's what they do. So I'm sure he knows. He's not ignorant. As Dr. He's not ignorant. He knows what he's doing. He's practicing racism. But we did hang out, and my battery is waning. We will be back a little later in the week. If you had a question or comment, something that you wanted to get in, just save it. We'll be back probably within the next 2 to 3 days. And certainly you can share it on Saturday when we do the compensatory call-in if you had something that you wanted to get in. I would encourage, if you took notes while Dr. Curry was on the program, the different books, articles that he referenced, check some of those out. Pretty another example, pretty interesting information. Folks who are at that university level, they tend to have access to a lot of details, specific details on the system, how it's put together, histories of what white people have done, and even, plans of what they look to be doing in the next 200, 300, 500 years. So check out some of those articles. That Thomas A. Foster, has some very interesting work. You can go to his faculty page and see some of the books that he's written, articles that he's written. Check out some of his material as well. With that, thanks everyone for tuning in. Glad we got to get lots and lots of questions. If you have any other feedback, questions, confusion, feel free to email untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in. You can also hit the Twitter @untiljustice, @untiljustice. Thanks all for tuning in. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Monday evening. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Anybody want to do the prayer to wrap things up? Right on. Again, we'll be back. Just check the Facebook, Black Talk Radio page, Twitter. We'll update when we are ready to roll. Thanks for tuning in, and be safe for the rest of your evening, rest of your week. We will speak again. Creator, it has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Context of White Supremacy. Signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Even my conditioning has been conditioned.